that. Okay, no problem. Right. Before we begin the debate on banning knives and swords from the UK streets, can I remind honourable members that under the terms of the House resolution on matters of sub judice, they should not refer to any individual cases which are currently before the courts. We now come to the Opposition Day motion in the name of the Leader of the Opposition on banning knives and swords from UK high streets. Alex Norris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the motion in my name, the name of the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Home Secretary. Ronan Kander was 16. He went to get a PlayStation controller from his friend and was yards away from home when he was murdered. He was murdered by two teenagers who used a ninja sword. They'd obtained that sword by buying it online and using someone else's ID to collect it. They stabbed him in a case of mistaken identity. This is a heartbreaking, tragic story, a young life lost, a family trapped in the most extraordinary grief. And we are here today because it is time that Parliament acts to take knife crime head on. 77%. That's how much knife crime has risen since 2015, according to the latest figures released by the ONS and the Home Office in recent weeks. That equates to a staggering 48,716 violent and sexual offences that were committed involving a knife or sharp instrument in the past year. There's a huge human cost to this, 261 lives lost in the year up to March 2022, the last complete data available to us, with roughly 4 in 10 murders involve a knife or sharp instrument. But of those carrying a knife, almost half of cases led to no further action, with current rules allowing those carrying knives to escape further sanction by writing an apology letter. Thank you.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, because he's describing a situation that was virtually identical to the one that we faced in Scotland 15 plus years ago. The initiative taken by the then Strathclyde Police Force and the Scottish Government since, though, was about a very different approach to tackling it, treating it as a public health and social problem with a violence reduction unit. There's nothing in the honourable gentleman's motion that I would agree with, but it's a bit like playing whack-a-mole with the different sorts of knives that are available. Does he not agree that this is an issue that actually requires a much more fundamental and radical approach to be taken?
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland for his intervention, and I can tell him I will be making that as part of my case, so I'm sure I will be able to meet that test. It feels, Mr. Speaker, like most days we wake up to another tragic story of death and of families torn apart. The most basic search online tells us it's all over the country: Bristol, Feltham, Warrington, Haverhill. My own community, Nottingham, was rocked last summer when my constituent Ian Coates and the University of Nottingham students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar were killed with a knife, and I stand with their families in their attempts to establish the facts and failings in this dreadful case. And things are getting worse, not better, and that means more young lives lost, more children drawn into crime, more exploited by criminals. And we know that this has a huge impact on our society. Hundreds of families crippled by grief for murdered loved ones, life chances of young people squandered, potential left unfulfilled, and the criminals getting away with it and going on to cause further misery. Knife crime destroys lives, it devastates families, and it creates fear in our communities. And that's why this debate matters, Mr. Speaker. We must invest in our young people so that they are supported to make the right decisions in life, and we must come down hard on those involved in knife crime. Real support, real consequences. I give way.
I'm for giving way. Under the Conservative Government and Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner, Cleveland has the highest crime rate in the UK. And only this weekend we saw another serious stabbing a mile down the road from me in Norton Village. Now, we hear the government try to talk the talk, but the bottom line has to be they're not taking the actions that are necessary. I'm sure my honourable friend will agree with me.
I'm grateful for that intervention. I do share my honourable friend's view. You know, he talks of a case in his community. We are waking up seemingly so many days in every week with another case in another part, in villages, towns and in cities. What the public quite rightly are looking for is for action from us. And that's very much what I will be setting out in my explanation of this motion. But before I do, I'll give way.
for the Shadow Minister giving way, and I'm glad that he mentioned us. And I get it's an opposition day debate, and you know the government will be criticised, but is it not the case that what the public on the left and the right and apolitical are looking for is cross-party consensus where it can be found in this place to deal with a very, very important issue? And party politics should be set aside. There should be greater cross-party working. Does he also agree that stop and search does have a part to play? I'd be interested in, and on machetes and zombie knives, they're not the only solution, banning them, but I think that's a place to start. But the most radical step is to work together.
I'm grateful for that intervention, and we have been clear throughout when it comes to this issue, where the government brings forward proposals that are designed to take this issue on, we will give them their support. And you know that is true with the forthcoming legislation on zombie knives, though we have concerns about its scope. But there has to be action, and you know it is our role where there isn't action to point that out, and I think you'll find that in the tone and spirit of my contribution. But we serve no one if we don't do that. But of course we will work and we will build consensus wherever we can, and I hope that the whole House can get behind our motion today. It would be a key mission of a future Labour government to make the streets safe and to halve knife crime within 10 years. And recently my honourable friend and the Leader of the Opposition unveiled our plans to deliver this, with a crackdown on knife crime today and a radical youth prevention programme, and this motion starts to build this out. And we are clear: no more loopholes, no more caveats, no more false promises. We need a total crackdown on the availability of serious weapons on Britain's streets. Which brings me to the motion, but before I go, I'll happily give way.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful for the honourable member for Nottingham North for his comments on this often heartbreaking topic. My constituent, Julie's daughter, Poppy Devi Waterhouse, was killed in her home with a knife already in her kitchen. Currently, offenders convicted of murder who use a weapon already available at the crime scene have a starting sentence 10 years lower than those who brought a weapon with them. Domestic violence murderers can bank on leniency. So does the honourable member agree that women killed by knives already in the home need to see equal justice?
Yeah, the honourable member raises such an important point that really does need parliamentary scrutiny. We have an anxiety, as honourable friends have mentioned many times, that crimes happening in domestic spaces are in some way deemed as less significant, and that can be reflected in sentencing. So again, I think that's something that bears our parliamentary scrutiny. To turn to the motion, first, we want to see the restriction of the sale of the most serious weapons, those that have no functional purpose. Now, we've seen from the government since 2015 16 different press releases about zombie knives, but action has been slow to follow. We are pleased that 2 weeks ago we saw the statutory instrument aimed at taking some of these knives and machetes off the streets, and as I say, we will support them in that venture. I hope to hear from the Minister an explanation of why that's a ban, not for now, not for in a few weeks' time, but for September, 8 months away. This is a very immediate problem that needs greater urgency. Where is that urgency? Where is that leadership? And as I say, he can be assured of our support, so let's get on with it. But we also believe, as set out in the motion, Mr. Speaker, that we should go further. We would broaden the ban to include a wider range of weapons and to toughen existing rules on serration and length. And that would mean finally banning blades such as ninja swords, the weapon that killed Ronan Kander. His incredible family are campaigning for this, ably supported by their Member of Parliament, the Right Honourable Member for Wolverhampton South East. And they are right. Any ban on offensive weapons that wouldn't have taken off the street the blade that killed their son is insufficient. And there is also an unintended consequence, we believe, of leaving out ninja swords. Those who sell these weapons are indifferent to their customer and their customer's intentions. Yeah. And if colleagues think I'm overstating my case, just put into a search engine zombie knives or ninja swords and look at how they are marketed. If knives and machetes are prohibited, these firms will just move on to pushing ninja swords at customers. This is a hole in the government's plan and it must be plugged. Moving on, we can go further still here. Many banned knives continue to be sold where young people can buy them and have them delivered to their home within a few days. We believe the government should introduce criminal sanctions on the tech executives who allow knife sales on their online marketplaces. Not just Ofcom sanctions, as the government have opted for, but proper criminal sanctions to send a very serious message to these leaders that if their platforms are being used and they are not actively making sure they're not being used for the sale of dangerous weapons, there are going to be serious consequences. Not ones that can be priced in as the cost of doing business, but very, very serious consequences. And to add to this, we must ensure that we have the right tools in law to deal with the digital age. So to drive this work forward, our motion calls for a rapid review of online knife sales from the point of purchase through to delivery. In particular, this would look at strengthening ID and age checks that are conducted by Royal Mail and Border Force for UK-bound parcels. At the moment, we know too often that serious weapons can be purchased online with loose ID and age checks, with little oversight and no background checks. And every time that that oversight is loose and a check's not carried out properly, it means that these weapons potentially fall into the wrong hands and are used to kill. We must ensure that we have a robust system, the most robust system as possible, to prevent this from happening. And for those who carry these weapons, we need to send an unmistakable message that the law will come down hard on them. Not apology letters, not weak warnings, proper sanctions and serious interventions. Before I move on, I'll give way, yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he's making a great speech. I just wanted to know whether he would support two parents in my constituency, Leanne and Mandy, whose children were killed by knife crime, and they're calling for much stronger sentences and greater deterrence in terms of knife crime. Would you agree with me and their families? Yeah. I'm
grateful for that intervention. I'm going to set out a few shortly, but I'd be very interested in meeting with Leanne and Mandy if my honourable friend was able to help facilitate that, to hear what more perhaps they might want to see. Our commitment, our belief is that every offender should be referred to a youth offending team and have a mandatory bespoke action plan to prevent reoffending. As part of this, we need tougher new guidance so that serious penalties are always being considered where appropriate, such as curfews, such as tagging, such as behavioural contracts. Too many of these are being overlooked, and very insufficient sanctions, such as I say, a letter of apology, are being used in their stead, and this is wrong, and we need stronger guidance from the centre on this. But we're clear, and this speaks to the right honourable gentleman's point, that all of this on its own will not resolve and remove the issue of knife crime in our communities. We must invest in young people, because prevention is better than cure. So we need a total approach. It's not an either or, we need both. And that's particularly germane for this debate, Mr Speaker, because we know that those who seek to profit from the sale of dangerous weapons shapeshift and adapt around legislation. That's one of the challenges. So we must tackle demand too, and tackle issues which mean that young people think they need to carry harmful weapons. So building on the success of Sure Start, the last truly transformative prevention programme for young children, we would create the Young Futures programme to help prevent violent crime. This would be a targeted programme in every area to identify the young people most at risk of being drawn into violent crime, most at risk of buying these products that we're seeking to restrict, Mr Speaker, and build a package of support around them that responds to the challenges that they are facing. I give way.
I'm grateful to him for giving way, as well as providing support to young people, and I welcome the £100 million commitment of existing funding to divert support to young people for preventative work. Does he agree with me that it's really crucial to provide role models, positive role models through mentoring to every young person in the country, which is something I've worked with the charity Uprising that I've chaired for many years? And does he also agree with looking at institutions like the Royal London Hospital Trauma Unit that's worked in the front line dealing with knife crime when people are in those hospitals, and paramedics have been working, and there's a great deal of knowledge that we can draw on to tackle this epidemic?
I'm really grateful for that intervention, and I'm going to speak to those points because the Honourable Lady has done incredible work that's admired both by myself and by the Shadow Home Secretary, and I think a lot of what I'm about to talk about is based off that experience because that work has been very, very good indeed. So we would be, the Young Futures programme is about bringing together services at a local level to better coordinate the delivery of preventative interventions around the young person, evidence-based interventions that help tackle mental health issues, that help tackle substance abuse issues, that help tackle the issues that people might get into with their friends and their family. And then we would bring them together in a national network that shares evidence, that delivers support for teenagers at risk of being drawn into crime across boundaries, and where appropriate could deliver universal youth provision. But then crucially, to speak to my honourable friend's point, we would build out from this with youth workers in A&E units, in custody centres, mentors in pupil referral units to target young people who are starting to be drawn into violence, particularly the point around healthcare settings, as my honourable friend says, and custody settings, Mr Speaker. Those are change moments. We know that that might be the moment on a point where an individual is sliding into serious violence, either as a perpetrator or a victim, may need that intervention, and that might be the moment at which we can get that change behaviour that will change and in many cases save their lives. That's why we think that this is so crucial. And I'll give way in 1 second, but this is crucial that we have this degree of investment into young people, otherwise this won't work. Before I move on, I'll give way.
He's making a good point, and as the Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland pointed out earlier, lots of this work has already been ongoing in Scotland for some years. And has he met with Medics Against Violence, whose Navigator project does exactly that within a hospital setting and intervenes with people with lived experience to young people to get them into that mind frame where they might want to exit that lifestyle and that violence that they've got themselves into?
I'm grateful for that intervention, and there is much clearly that we can learn from the Scottish approach. I haven't had the opportunity to meet with them, but I will seek out on the Honourable Lady's recommendation to do that. As I say, we support strongly the idea of support and mentors in A&E and in custody settings. We believe that that's something that the evidence shows would be highly effective. We also, Mr Speaker, we need to end the exploitation of children and young people by criminal gangs, and that of course includes county lines. So we need a new criminal offence of child exploitation and a new serious organised crime strategy to go after those cowards that make millions off the back of exploiting young people. And to deliver this is the sort of change to deliver this, we need a new proper cross-government coalition to end knife crime, bringing together those who have a key role in tackling it and in keeping young people safe. Ministers, community leaders, faith leaders, the families of victims, sporting bodies, tech companies and young people themselves. Everybody should be brought into this fight. That is the sort of government we would seek to lead if given the opportunity. I'll give way.
The Honourable Member is making a very passionate speech about bringing various people from across government and across community together to tackle this issue of knife crime. Can I therefore ask the Honourable Gentleman if he'd ask his colleague next to him that when the Shadow Home Secretary and the Leader of the Opposition held a summit in East London last year on knife crime, the Mayor of London, who is the Police and Crime Commissioner, was nowhere to be seen. Can he answer why?
I have to say I'm a little bit saddened by that intervention. This is a deeply serious issue, Mr Speaker, that the public expect to see answers. I don't think the public would consider the policing of the Mayor, or indeed the Honourable Gentleman's, or anybody else's diary to be part of a substantive solution. I have to say, I wrote my notes for his intervention ahead of time because I know 86 days before a mayoral election, they're much more interested in trying to fight that election than they are in trying to tackle that problem. And so I'll say to the Honourable Gentleman, if he really believes that's the right approach, I have to say I don't, but it's for him to use his time as he chooses. Let's put that to the people of London. I give way.
I'm grateful for the Shadow Minister giving way on the point of working together, perhaps outside this House rather than inside this House. Can I say I completely agree with him? Yes, I agree with Her Majesty's opposition on working together more cohesively, local authorities, public bodies, health services, etc. And particularly around pupil referral units and its exclusions. There are so many sort of disparities throughout the country. I think it makes sense to bring everybody together and look at best practice.
Yeah, I think that's a hugely important intervention from the Honourable Gentleman. And, you know, I've got real anxieties around pupil referral units, exclusions, internal exclusions. You know, this was a problem prior to the pandemic, but what we've seen with school absence now only compounds that. And there is a risk of there being, Mr Speaker, a generation of young people who are very vulnerable to this type of behaviour unless we take the field and fight for their hearts and minds, frankly. So I think the Honourable Gentleman and I are in the same position on that. I will draw my remarks to a close, Mr Speaker, because I know there are lots of colleagues who have lots of things they want to say. The motion before us, in the name of the Leader of the Opposition, is tightly drafted and calls for 3 of the most pressing changes that we believe are needed to kick-start this process. The ban on ninja swords with a consultation on further extensions to the proposed ban on zombie knives, an end-to-end review of online knife sales and criminal liability for senior executives of those websites that do not adequately prevent them from selling knives. We believe these are reasonable changes that the whole House can get behind. I hope the government will take them seriously. They should support this motion today. I will say to the Minister, he and I have been working on the Criminal Justice Bill for seemingly very many weeks. We will be bringing changes to this effect to the Criminal Justice Bill. They should accept those too. If they take up our ideas between now and then, we will support them in that. But what we won't do, Mr. Speaker, is ignore the large-scale damage that knife crime is doing across the country. The public rightly are looking to us for leadership and action. We stand ready to give them that. Thank you very much.
The question is, as on the order paper, Minister Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I am grateful to the opposition for giving me the opportunity to respond and speak on behalf of and about this government's record on fighting crime. And I will come to that, including our work to get weapons off the streets and stop them falling into the wrong hands, which is having a real impact. But, Mr. Speaker, much as my right honourable friend, the member for the Aiken, said, we should remember what this is all about, and my right honourable friend was absolutely right. It is not about party politics, it's not about point scoring or cheap jibes or sound bites, because the truth is that serious violence and knife crime leaves the same trail and misery and devastation in their wake, regardless of the constituency that we represent. The tragic reality, Mr. Speaker, is that many of us, in fact far too many, on both sides of this House will have had the humbling experience of sitting with the loved ones of victims of crime whose lives have been cut short in the most tragic ways. And I'll give way in a few moments. Let me finish my introductory remarks, and then of course I'll give way to the Honourable Lady. There is very little that one can say in those circumstances that will ease the pain of losing a son, a daughter, a brother or a sister. And, Mr. Speaker, it's incumbent on all of us, and by us I mean the government, the police, but also each and every one of us here who contributes to public life, to strain every sinew to stop others suffering as they have. I give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and with regards to the remarks he's just made, I've also been in the situation in the last month of having to write to the mother of a 21-year-old young man who was stabbed to death at Strawberry Hill Station in my constituency last month. And understandably, parents and teenagers and other young people are raising their concerns with me about how we can tackle this huge increase. In London alone, as a policing minister will know, we've seen almost a fifth increase in knife crime since 2022. Now, if we're going to ban all of these weapons, we need good intelligence-led community policing. But in London, since 2015, we've seen our community police support officers cut by a third. So what assurances can the Minister give my constituents that we will see an uplift in police officers, including in places like Richmond upon Thames, which are often deprioritised because it's seen as a safe area? No area is immune from knife crime.
Yeah. I agree with the Honourable Lady on her last point, and Mr. Speaker, I feel, given the representatives that are here in this chamber, that there will be a lot that will be said, and rightly said, in relation to crime and knife crime in London. I know the Honourable Lady will be contributing later on in this debate as well, because it's right to say that every time somebody picks up a knife or other dangerous weapon, there is the potential for bloodshed. And every time someone arms themselves, whether for protection or with violent intent, they risk ruining not only others' lives, but their own lives as well. And this has been brought home time and again in the most devastating fashion in recent days, in recent weeks and months. And my thoughts and prayers are with the family and friends who are mourning such devastating losses. It is any parent's worst nightmare. Mr. Speaker, that the victims are so often young people with their whole lives ahead of them, it makes it all the more unbearable. And in our shock and our grief, we must remain steadfast in our conviction that we can get knives and other dangerous weapons off our streets, that we can prevent young people from getting drawn into violent crime in the first place. And again, in the spirit that my right honourable friend, the member for Aiken, made at the outset in an intervention on the Shadow Minister, I'd like to reflect on a debate that we had before recess that was led by my right honourable friend, the member for Aldridge Brownhills, and there was actually cross-party support during the course of that debate. Mr. Speaker, it's right to say my right honourable friend mentioned the Knife Angel in the borough of Walsall in Aldridge Brownhills, and she mentioned also a campaign from the Brindley family and the Brindley Foundation that was set up to bring about positive social action as a result of a tragedy. And I know my honourable friend, the member for Old Bexley and Sidcup, made powerful interventions during the course of that debate as well. But it is right to look at the numbers and the latest data as well, because when looking at the latest data on hospital admissions of under 25s following an assault with a sharp object, it shows that there is a 25% reduction since December 2019. This is a good indicator, the most reliable indicator for serious youth violence. And I know my right honourable friend, the Policing Minister, will mention the crime survey as well in due course, because the crime survey shows that violent crime has reduced by 51% since 2010. And it's right to say that nationally homicide has fallen. But it is obvious, Mr. Speaker, that data on a chart provides no comfort for victims' families. And of course, any incident of serious violence or knife crime is one too many. And that is why this government is continually looking at what more we can do to protect our citizens, especially children and young people, and drive those numbers down further. Mr. Speaker, the police are on the front line in this effort, and I know that forces up and down the country are aware that this is an issue of significant public concern, and they are firmly committed to tackling it. And it's right that I, as a Dorset Member of Parliament, mention our Police and Crime Commissioner, David Sidwick, and I pay tribute to him and the work that he is doing and the crime plan that he has put together for Dorset. But, Mr. Speaker, thanks to our recruitment drive, which has delivered the promised 20,000 extra officers, we have significantly bolstered the police across England and Wales. And with every additional officer, the ability of forces to crack down on weapons carrying and violence is strengthened. And that's included through the natural deterrence that flows from an increased police presence. And there is the added benefit of reassurance to all of our communities who are clear that they want to see more officers on the beat. But of course, Mr. Speaker, it's not just about how many police officers there are, but what forces do with the resources and with the powers that have been given to them. And this government has consistently and publicly backed the police to take the toughest possible stance when it comes to addressing serious violence, knife crime and weapons carrying. And that includes supporting the use of stop and search, which is a crucial tool. And it's right to say that since 2019, the police have removed 120,000 knives and dangerous weapons through stop and search, surrender programmes and other targeted action as well. And on that specific subject, every knife seized through stop and search, as I say, is a potential life saved. And in the year 2022 to 2023, stop and search resulted in about 74,000 arrests and removed over 15,000 weapons and firearms from our streets. The significance of stop and search should not be downplayed. Every knife or weapon seized is a potential life saved.
Yes, of course I'll be very I'm grateful to the Minister of State giving way. On criminal sanctions, I mean, the opposition motion, I think, forgive me, is too generic and too sweeping and perhaps too adversarial. But on the latter point of criminal liability for the senior management of websites which indirectly sell illegal lives online, that particular point, unless the Minister of State doesn't want to tell me, what is the government's current thinking vis-à-vis the Criminal Justice Bill, which I know is working closely with the Shadow Minister? Thank you.
Well, it's right to say that the Crime and Justice Bill is passing through. It's had its committee stage, and my right honourable friend, the Policing Minister, is responding to the debate. I'm not going to steal his thunder But I will encourage my right honourable friend, the member for the Aiken, to be here for the close of the debate when the policing minister will be winding up on behalf of the government. But it is right to say in the round that we actually have some of the toughest knife crime laws in the world. And for example, it's illegal to carry any fixed-bladed knife in public without a good reason, and that carries a maximum sentence of 4 years in prison. And the Offensive Weapons Act from 2019 strengthened the law on sale and the delivery of knives to under 18s. Of course I'll give them.
Yes, talking about tougher sentences, and I know this government is bringing in very tough sentences for knife crime, but would my honourable friend agree that knife crime is due to a number of factors? It's not just about tough sentences. It includes socio-economic, gang activity, county lines, drug trade, which affects us in Hastings and Ryan, social media influence. So does he agree that building trust between communities and law enforcement is as important as effective community policing and tough sentences? And as part of that building of trust, raising awareness about knife crime and educating young people about the risks can deter them from carrying weapons.
Mr. Speaker, may I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. And I will turn and address that point directly because she makes a very good point. And I want to turn to violence reduction units, which I think will help to address some of the points that she was raising. I'm very grateful to her for that intervention. But the fact is, Mr. Speaker, where there are gaps or loopholes and where they're identified, we have shown time and again that we will do what is necessary and we will always put the law-abiding majority first. And my right honourable friend mentioned the Criminal Justice Bill that's currently before Parliament. It's the latest illustration of our unwavering commitment to that mission. And it will give the police more powers to seize dangerous weapons. It will create a new offence of possession of a bladed weapon with an intent to harm, and it will increase sentences for those who import, manufacture or sell dangerous weapons to under 18s. But as my honourable friend just mentioned in her intervention, as well as tough enforcement, there is also an emphasis that must be placed on prevention. And of course, it goes without saying that the more we can do and the best thing we can do to make all of our communities safe is to stop these crimes from happening in the first place. And may I mention and develop my point in relation to violence reduction units, which bring together communities and local partners to tackle underlying causes of violence in the first place. And I know that my honourable friend will be interested to hear that in particular violence reduction units identify particularly young people who are in danger of following the wrong path. They bring together key partners from local authorities, the police, health and communities and beyond to better understand local drivers of violence. And this includes providing intensive support through mentoring programmes and the like. And I know that my honourable friend and others, hopefully across the House, will support the work that is already going on there. And in addition to that, Mr. Speaker, we've supported the police in their implementation of the GRIP Hotspot Patrols programme. And taken together, these initiatives have prevented over 3,200 hospital admissions for any violent injury since funding began in 2019. This shows the real-world impact our approach is having as we strive relentlessly to break the deadly cycle of violence that robs young people of a future and that destroys families.
I thank the Minister for giving way and for this very powerful speech, but does he agree with me that the best thing that we could do is put police stations on our high streets, such as in Maltby, Dinnington and Swallownest and Rother Valley? And I'm sure he's aware that the Labour Police and Crime Commissioner has underspent his budget this year of the tune of £3.5 million, money that could have been used to reopen police stations and get that going. Does he back my campaign to get these high streets having police stations and use that underspent money on that?
Well, I'm very grateful indeed to my honourable friend for raising and making that point. He's a powerful advocate for his community, and I know he will continue to champion this important issue and that he will continue his campaign. And I look forward to his further contributions. I'm very grateful to him for raising that important point. But it is right, Mr. Speaker, that through the concerted efforts of the government, police and partners, we have shown that this threat can be addressed, but we will not stop there. Of course, I'll give it.
Thank the Minister for responding to this debate, which is immensely important. But can I just press him on the specific issues in the motion? Will he now agree for the government to launch a new consultation on including ninja swords as part of the ban on online knife sales. If he could just agree to that today, we would make a significant step forward.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady will know that in my response to the debate that I referred to previously before recess, that the police tell us that the greatest risk at the moment is the criminal use of zombie-style knives and machetes. That is action that is already being taken. But of course, we will take this keep this under review. We will not stop there. We will continue to think of the victims and their families. Mr. Speaker, we reaffirm our commitment to getting weapons and knives off our streets. We can and we must stop and make our communities safer, and that is what this government will work tirelessly to achieve.
Karin Smyth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise to speak very conscious of the tragic deaths of 2 teenage boys stabbed in my constituency last week and the very live police inquiry which is currently being conducted. And my thoughts are with the families and friends of those boys, in particular in this debate. And I'm conscious that there have been many debates and many people here speaking today who have also been hit in their communities by those tragedies. But lamentably, the discussions have not stemmed the rise in knife crime as we have seen in my own community last weekend. Now, regular meetings were already being held in that community of Knoll West over the past few months, set up by some amazing women in the community who got together and got with the police to have regular meetings, and fortuitously one of those was on the Monday after the events, and I was able to attend that meeting where people came together to express their grief and sorrow, but also it was a very strong message from that meeting, and they were very, very clear that fundamentally they could see that events were leading to a tragic outcome, but they wanted to know, where has the resources from their communities gone? Where are all the police on their streets? What has happened to their local healthcare and mental health care services to support young people? What has happened to those youth services? What has happened to the level of council funding that means those streets and those communities are fit for living in and around, the street cleaning, etc., that makes our communities so vibrant? They know, despite the sort of highfalutin statistics thrown around in this place, they know that their community has lost out. The people in Knoll West and the rest of South Bristol, like across the country, have seen those services disappear because of political decisions made in this place since 2010. And I'm unashamedly political about that point, because those decisions do have consequences in our communities. Now, I want to pay tribute to Avon and Somerset Police for the preventive work that they were doing with those communities before these tragic instances, the way they have worked since, and Bristol City Council and organisations like Youth Moves and Bristol City Football Club's Robbins Foundations. They have been doing amazing work in the last, for a long time, but particularly in the last couple of weeks. But despite that, and despite working with the voluntary sector and community sector across Bristol, they cannot fill that gap. But the very clear message from that meeting, and indeed from our city, is that we are totally united in getting these crimes and these criminals off our streets. But we need much more than the basics. These communities deserve the resources to help young people thrive, and we owe it to the families of those boys who lost their lives to do everything we can to ensure it doesn't happen again. So my constituents are looking for answers on how we prevent crime. But as my honourable friend for the front bench has said, we also need to be giving them action. We have to redouble our efforts to bring government support back into these communities, to allow our local authorities, schools and the police force to take the preventative measures we need to tackle this knife crime. It is vital that there are tough consequences for those carrying lethal weapons. There must be sanctions. But crucially, we also need early interventions to stop young people being drawn into crime and, as my honourable friend has said, those cowards that bring them into crime must face also strong sanctions. Working with the community, as the police are doing in South Bristol, is vital to help intervene on early criminal behaviour. But we also desperately need government support for youth services and mental health support in schools to ensure young people are safe. And I'd also like to pay tribute to all the schools that are working so hard now across South Bristol to ensure that young people are safe and are encouraged to go back into school and back out to live their lives. Young people need to be listened to and crucially have that stake in our society. That's why bringing together local partnerships of schools, neighbourhood policing and community groups are so important to prevent crime and tackle the crisis amongst young people. The communities I represent across South Bristol, across all of South Bristol, need to know that we here in Westminster understand the urgency and the devastating effect that knife crime is having. Now, I do hope the government will do more to address the shortcomings of the current proposals by extending that ban to cover ninja swords and introduce criminal liability for the senior executives of those websites which are still selling those weapons online. We do need a properly resourced cross-government effort to tackle crime, with tough consequences on those perpetrators and, crucially, support for the victims and a renewed focus on prevention.
Nickie Aiken.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A couple of weeks ago, I was sitting in an APPG meeting in Parliament when I received a call from my 17-year-old son's school, which is very unusual to get a call, so I took it, and his head of year informed me that he had been mugged by several youths wearing balaclavas, carrying knives. You can imagine my feelings and my utter shock and concern for my son. And it suddenly dawned on me that I am not alone. There are so many mums who have that call. Sometimes that call is tragic and they never get to see their son again, or their daughter, but it is quite often too many of our sons are involved. Mr. Speaker, I am absolutely relieved to tell you that it was a case of misidentity. He hadn't been mugged. He had witnessed the mugging further up the street. But again, it reiterates the issue that nobody is ever immune from knife crime. It is not a socio-economic issue that only affects certain demographics. It can hit any family, as we have seen in too many situations in this country over the years. It can be professional, middle-class kids, it can be kids from estates, it doesn't matter. Knife crime, it will affect every child who's out there, and that is why we all have to work together to ensure that our children are safe when they go out. I am one of those mums who cannot relax when my children are out until I hear that key in the door, and I know I'm not alone in that situation. Mr. Speaker, this is not a modern phenomenon. It is not happening just now. It's happening for decades, and we have got to get a grip of this. 11 years ago, a young boy, a 16-year-old boy, was literally slaughtered in Pimlico in my constituency. Hanny was 16 and was attacked by a group of young people and was murdered. And 5 young men were sentenced for 26, 24 years and at His Majesty's pleasure. And it's always dawned on me that Hanny lost his life and his mother Pauline will never hear his key in the door. But also those young people who were involved in that murder, their whole lives have been ended, their families' lives have been ended. And we have got to do more to ensure that those children do not spend the rest of their lives in prison. It is not always, of course we don't want to lose any more victims, but I also believe that those involved in these heinous crimes are often victims themselves because they are involved in county lines or any form of the drug crime, and we've got to deal with these people. Mr. Speaker, my constituency of the cities of London and Westminster, unfortunately, is one of the hot spots for the Met. It has the highest number of knife or sharp instrument offences recorded in any borough in the Metropolitan Police Force. Over the previous rolling 12 months, there were 1,930 knife offences in Westminster alone.
Shocking.
increase of over 18% compared to the year before. And between January...
Office for National Statistics for the year ending March 2023 show that Sussex recorded 57 knife offences per 100,000 population, which is below the national average of 87 per 100,000, with 16% reduction in knife crime for that period. So contrasting that with the Met Police, which has the highest funding of any force in the country, where the ONS figures show a 22% increase in knife crime in London, which of course has a knock-on effect on all the counties around London. Would my honourable friend agree that the Labour Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, should take a leaf out of Sussex Police and Crime Commissioner and Sussex Police, Conservative is Katie Bourne, and get a grip of this serious night crime...
Order! Please. If you want to speak, we'll put you in to speak. That's easy. But just to help, we've got to get questions. Everybody needs to get in as well. It's far too long, and I want to be helpful to everybody. And I'll certainly put your name on the list. You've been here from the beginning. Nickie Aiken.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with my honourable friend that obviously London, being the largest city in the country with over 9 million people, is always going to have larger stats. But London is being let down. Londoners are being let down. They have been constantly let down for 8 years because of this current mayor's failure to get a grip of knife crime. There are too many families across London who should never have had to be involved in knife crime and lose their beloved children. Madam Deputy Speaker, there were 156 offences in December 2023 alone of knife crime. And I think we have all got to realise that this is not going to stop unless we get a grip of it. And it's got to be, I personally think, an holistic approach. It is not just about stricter sentences. Of course there is a part to play within sentences and the criminal justice system, but we have got to get to the nub of the reason why young people are carrying knives in the first place. I've always believed if you carry a knife, you are more likely to use it. Yeah. And I'm so concerned that today too many young people feel that they have to carry a knife for their own protection. We have got to persuade our young people that there is an alternative way. And we do that, and we've heard by several members here today of different approaches, and we have to learn from what's happening in Scotland. I think they've got an awful lot to offer. There's got to be a public health approach to this. There's also got to be a community approach. When I was Cabinet Member for Public Protection at Westminster Council in 2013, I took on the brief, and I was shocked to find that Westminster, a borough that people always think of Mayfair and Belgravia and the West End as being affluent areas. We, in 2013, were number 3 in the Met's serious youth violence table. We were even higher than Hackney. And I remember going to see the then Deputy Mayor for Policing, who is now a Hampshire Conservative MP, and he told me if I didn't get on top of it immediately, it would only get worse, and it would never change. So I immediately worked with my brilliant officers at Westminster City Council and the police, and we established the first ever integrated gangs unit. And I set up a scheme called Your Choice, because I wanted to send a message to young people: you have a choice. You can go down the criminal justice system. You can be involved in gangs. You can be involved in knife crime, but it will only end one way, either in the morgue or in prison. Or there is alternative ways where you can work with us. And I was very clear that we had to understand why young people were involved, and also a message to their parents. And we often know that parents do not know what their young people are getting involved in when they are out, but also they don't know how to handle this. So it was a message and a helping hand to parents as well. And I'm delighted to inform you, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we went straight back down those tables within a year to where we usually are, around about 16th out of 19. So, but it takes it has to be a holistic but a full approach with all the agencies working together. In the Integrated Gangs Unit, we had the police, we had probation, we had special needs, we had schools, we had social workers. It was a whole approach because, interestingly, one of the things that we discovered was a lot of the young people involved or on the periphery of knife crime had speech and language issues. They couldn't properly communicate. They also had not really progressed since primary school. They'd had a nightmare getting into secondary, changing and moving into secondary school, and they had been lost to the system. So then we grabbed these young men, and I am, as I said, delighted that we did improve the situation. But we have got to ensure that we all work together on this. It shouldn't be a political issue. This is a community issue where all our young people deserve us all to work together. We've already heard today about violence reduction units, and we do have one in London, and it's run by a very impressive woman, Lib Peck, who I've known for a long time. But I honestly do not think that she's getting the backing and the seriousness from the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. I remember in 2018 he held a knife crime summit just before the local elections, and the then Home Secretary was here, attended, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner attended, the Deputy Mayor for Policing attended. He chaired it. He didn't speak. He was not being held to account. And I'll never forget that he never allowed himself to be held to account on this situation. He has got to be held to account. Of course I will give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. And when we talk about accountability, it works both ways. And although I agree with everybody that has spoken that says this is not a political result, it affects political stripes, all political stripes. But how we have got here is political decision-making. When the Honourable Member talks about children not being able to speak or read or write, that's a political decision of 14 years of this government eroding our education system. Yeah. When we talk about policing and not enough resources, that's the decision to erode community policing. Yeah. So would the Honourable Member take some responsibility for 14 years of this?
Yeah. I thank the Honourable Member for her intervention. I have to gently push back and say, if you look at the PISA tables, where under the Conservative government we have become straight up from 25th in the tables under the last Labour government. We are now 14th for reading, which I think is a very impressive result. And also, I'm sure the Policing Minister will mention this later, but this government did provide this current Mayor of London with extra funding for 1,000 extra police officers, but failed to recruit those officers, and so the money went back into the pot and has been given to other police forces who I'm sure have taken advantage of that. But this is not a political issue, and I can say that I will take responsibility for when I was lead with Westminster Council, when we had cut youth services, we had cut them, and we had seen then a direct link to issues on the street. And I put my hands up and I said, absolutely, and we put £1.5 million back into the pot, because it is right that we make sure that young people have choices and they have the ability to do things after school, after college, and that they are given the best start in life. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are talking today here about a knife and sword ban and legislation that is required. I find it quite incredible that manufacturers do not take the same responsibility that they should be, and that they can get away through loopholes in legislation so that they are now producing zombie knives without writing on, because zombie knives with writing on are banned. I have absolutely no understanding about why anybody would want to manufacture a zombie knife in the first place. There's only one use for them, and that is not a use that we want to see. So I would suggest perhaps to ministers that perhaps we look at more flexible legislation around the words of blades or something like that, rather than being so specific about particular products, that we are able to widen up the legislation so that it covers so many different products and any future products. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's also important that we look at other corporates like record labels who are willing to put out drill music, which is often celebrating gang culture, and there has got to be a direct link to young people feeling in culture that is the right thing to do, to carry a knife and perhaps be willing to use it. Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome this debate today. I think it's a very, very important debate that we have across party to ensure that we do work together, to ensure that we send a very clear message to all young people that carrying a knife is not the right solution, and that every young person in this country, whatever town, city or village they live in, whatever their background, they deserve to be safe in their lives. Thank you.
Kim Leadbeater.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'm pleased that the opposition has secured this important debate today. And it is an important debate. It's also, as we've seen already, a very emotional debate for many of us. And it's certainly one of that nature for myself. Serious violence, including knife crime, is a critical issue in cities, towns and villages across the country. And it is important to acknowledge this isn't just a London problem. It affects many of our constituencies across the whole country. Indeed, as has been said, knife crime alone has risen by 77% since 2015. And the impact of this is felt widely. It's not just the devastating and all too often fatal impact felt by immediate family and friends, but also the trauma and distress felt by the wider community. Madam Deputy Speaker, in Batley and Spen, we've unfortunately felt first-hand the traumatic and life-changing impact of knife crime. Since my election, I have worked with two extremely brave local families who have had their lives torn apart by two truly dreadful incidents involving horrific attacks with knives. Robert Wilson from Bristol was attacked and stabbed to death in January 2020 outside the factory where he worked, just doing his job, by two youths wielding a samurai sword in what the judge called a frenzied and senseless attack. His wife Elaine is a remarkable woman who has shown incredible strength and selflessness following this heinous attack, and she is determined to raise awareness of the horrors knife crime inflicts upon families and communities. Despite her own unimaginable personal pain, she speaks to young people in schools about her experience to help them understand the potentially life-changing consequences of carrying a knife. Just a few months after Robert was killed, in June 2020, Bradley Gledhill, a local 20-year-old, was attacked and stabbed to death by 6 young men, 5 of whom were still teenagers, in Batley. This despicable attack on Bradley and 2 of his friends, who were also seriously injured, shook the community. It was unprovoked, robbed a young man of his future, and showed the very worst of humanity. Having met his incredibly strong mum, Kelly Hubbard, and his sister Bryony, words cannot describe the trauma and devastation brought upon their family. But like Elaine, they have channeled their trauma with incredible resilience and strength to campaign to tackle knife crime by establishing the Bin the Blades campaign on social media. And they work with local schools, speaking to students to convey the seriousness of this issue and the consequences of dangerous weapons at an early age. I recently worked with Elaine, Kelly and Bryony and a soon-to-be short film commissioned by the Be Best group of schools across Batley and Bristol, specifically on the horrors and impact of knife crime, in which I also reflected on my own personal experience of the murder of my sister Jo Cox in 2016. It was an extremely emotional experience for all of us, but we also felt that we had a duty to spread the message about the real horrors and personal impact that knife crime can have. And this important work is having an impact. I cannot praise these brave individuals and the schools that are involved in this project enough for what they are doing. But no other family should have to go through what these families and the other families that we have heard about today, or indeed my own family, have had to go through. Sadly, there is no single, simple solution to eliminate knife crime and remove dangerous weapons from our street. But families and communities need national leadership if we are to address this most serious of issues. I'm always happy to work on a cross-party basis, but this national leadership has been lacking in recent years. That's why I'm pleased that Labour has a 5-point plan that will deal with knife crime in a holistic, multi-agency way. Of course, we need tougher consequences for carrying a knife, and of course we need more officers on our streets. But we also need early intervention in schools, including youth hubs. We need youth workers embedded in A&E units, pupil referral units and custody centres, and the establishment of mental health and mentoring programmes. We must also finally crack down on the availability of these hideous weapons and take action where the Conservatives have sadly failed. We should also go after the gangs and the exploitation of young people who are drawn into criminality. And all of this should be coordinated across government. A Home Office, health, education approach that addresses the root causes of this issue and not just the symptoms. An approach that will break the chains of criminality, prevent young people getting into these groups and gangs in the first place, and provide help and mentoring if they do, by offering a tailored and supported route out. Like colleagues across the House, I visit schools in my constituency most weeks, as well as local community groups, sports clubs and businesses. I applaud the work they do across Batley and Spen to build strong communities, but I also hear the fear many have around antisocial behaviour and violence in our communities, including knife crime. They're worries about young people getting drawn into dangerous behaviours, or they're worried that they might simply end up in the wrong place at the wrong time. Only a tough approach, but one that is targeted and multi-agency, will succeed. It is hard work, and it will take time, resources, determination and coordination. And it isn't a gimmick. The Labour plan displays the seriousness with which we take this issue, and our mission-led approach, which has been sorely missing over recent years. Only Labour has a detailed plan to make our towns and villages safer, restore safety to our communities and get these dangerous weapons off our streets. We owe it to Robert, to Bradley, their families and all the other families we will hear about today to put that plan into place, and I'm very pleased to endorse the Labour plan today.
On behalf of the whole House, can I say to the Honourable Lady that we all appreciate the courage that it takes for her to speak on this subject, and that we as a House and as friends and acquaintances will never forget the sacrifice made by her sister Jo Cox while she was carrying out her duties as a Member of Parliament. Thank you. Louis French.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I would also like to place on record my kind of thanks and the courageousness that you've shown in demonstrating your personal family experience. We've heard a lot about how this shouldn't be a political debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, today, but I'm afraid it is very much a political choices that have been made. And London highlights what Labour can do in power. Not my words, Madam Deputy Speaker, but those of the Labour leader in a rare moment of consistency. And for once, I can agree with him. Just look at the regional crime data, and specifically our capital city, London, where the only PC Londoners are likely to come across is political correctness. The two areas where knife crime has risen the most, London and the West Midlands, both are areas which have a Labour Police and Crime Commissioner in charge. If you take these Labour-controlled areas out of the national figures, knife crime would have actually fallen across the country last year, proving yet again that the shadow front bench really needs to get its own house in order before preaching to others in this place. Tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. Empty words that we have heard Labour politician after Labour politician parrot out for the last 30 years. But when in power, those words could not be further from reality, from the pound shop Blairites. And for all the playground politics of this place, we must remember that these failures have real-life consequences for both the victims of crime and our communities. Growing up in Bexley and one of London's suburbs, life was always relatively safe, with Bexley consistently ranked in the top 5 of London's safest boroughs. Issues such as knife crime and gang crime were viewed as a distant inner-city issue, which many families, including my own, thought they had left behind when they chose a better life for their children in Conservative-run Bexley. But fast forward to today, and while Conservative-run Bexley is still one of the safest boroughs in London, with approximately a 1/3 lower crime rate than the rest of London, fears about knife and gang crime on our doorsteps are very real. Madam Deputy Speaker, several serious incidents have tragically taken place in recent months in my constituency, and my thoughts remain with all those families and those across London that have lost loved ones. The latest crime rate data also highlights that violent crime has trended up consistently since Sadiq Khan became mayor. And tragically, Bexley is not immune from Labour's shameful record in London over the past 8 years, which has now seen over 1,000 people killed. Life after life destroyed by the scourge of knife crime in London, with Londoners let down time and time again by politicians in this place not brave enough to openly back effective policing measures such as stop and search, which take on average 400 dangerous weapons off the streets each month. The Labour front bench could not even bring itself today to mention stop and search in their comments. Let us not forget that it was this Labour Mayor of London who openly pledged, and I quote, to do all in his power to further cut the use of stop and search. Now look at the state of London after 8 years of Sadiq Khan's politically correct policing. Just look at the data. In London, we have had a 54% increase in knife crime since Labour took office. And according to the Met's official data, the number of stop and searches carried out in 2023 was 18.9% lower than the 12 months before. And at the same time, knife crime offences rose by 17.1%. And before anyone accuses me of stoking a culture war, which we all know is the less new buzzword to try and shut down critical debates of their woke ideas, I would also highlight that the official data shows that white people were the most searched ethnic group in this period, 10,000 more over a 2-year period. This is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, I make no apology for my support for frontline officers using the likes of stop and search to help take the dangerous knives off the streets, and why I back this government to close the legal loopholes on zombie knives and to roll out scan and search technologies as quick as possible. As politicians, we should all be showing real leadership in this place and doing the same. The public have quite rightly had enough of empty gesture politics and just warm words from politicians when yet another life is unnecessarily taken. They want action. They want their political leaders to get a grip on crime and to make all of our communities safer again. And in London, the need to get a grip on crime and get back to basics policing could not be clearer. Not only are the Metropolitan Police in special measures, but the leadership now faces a confidence crisis from both the public's perspective and from many serving frontline police officers. Morale in the Met has arguably never been lower, and it's little wonder when decent, hard-working frontline officers feel that time and time again they do not have the backing of the Mayor and their leaders to do the dangerous job of being a police officer in London. Whether that's using stop and search to take dangerous knives off the streets, or specially trained firearms officers still having the confidence to pull the trigger in those split-second life or death moments when they guard us in places like this. And I'm genuinely sad to say that I was not surprised that the Met was the only force in the country that failed to hit its recruitment target, despite millions of pounds in support being provided directly by this government. Yet another failure by the Labour Mayor and Police and Crime Commissioner, one that has cost London more than 1,000 police officers. 1,000 extra police officers who could be walking the beat, actually attending burglaries, or helping to stop what feels like a never-ending rise in knife crime. Seriously, what chances do ordinary Londoners have when criminal gangs roam the streets of London targeting their next victims? With the only questions normally being, was it a watch this time, a car or a phone that was stolen? And will the police even bother to try and investigate the crime? And true to form, and like what the Labour Party are trying to do here today, the Labour Mayor of London continues to deflect all of these failures onto the government, rather than take any accountability as the Police and Crime Commissioner for London. In fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, I understand recently the Office of Statistics Regulation recently had to correct Sadiq Khan's misinformation on knife crime, stating that knife crime has significantly increased across his tenure, not that it had declined as he claimed. Quick to plead poverty at every opportunity, but he always manages to find money for his mates or to waste on his latest pet projects rather than more funding for frontline policing. All paid for, of course, from the wallets of ordinary Londoners, including a staggering £200 increase in the mayor's share of his council tax and his continued hammering of motorists across London. And look at how he spends taxpayers' hard-earned money. £30 million for his union mates despite a record number of strikes. £29.5 million on additional staffing costs, including a 57% rise in the mayor's office costs and a 33% rise in press office spending. And let's not forget the £10 million for Met officers to learn what colour their personalities are. Now, I don't know, Madam Deputy Speaker, what colour my personality is. But what I do know from my experience of life is that when you see red ahead, you should follow the warning signs and stop. And when it comes to crime and transport, the great British public should look very closely at the sorry state of our capital city to see the big, bright red warning sign highlighting what to expect if another left-wing human rights London lawyer was ever in charge of our United Kingdom. As the leader of the opposition has said himself, London highlights what Labour can do in power. With taxes up 70%, London now officially the slowest city in the world to drive. That's if your car hasn't been stolen already. And more than 1,000 people tragically killed under this Labour mayor. A Labour-run United Kingdom, Madam Deputy Speaker, is a scary prospect indeed.
Lynn Bryan. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wish I could say it was an honour to follow the honourable gentleman, but I wouldn't like to mislead this House in any way. I also think that, no, I mislead this House by saying I enjoyed the honourable gentleman's rant and extraordinary contribution this afternoon. I'd also like to just gently say, if he does want to audition to become the Conservatives' failing candidate for the mayoral election that's about to be held, there are better places to do it than here, particularly if he's too fripped to take an intervention from the other side. I would gently say it does suggest that the honourable gentleman isn't capable of listening to anybody or engaging in debate. He is very comfortable with his own voice. Madam Deputy Speaker, last July in West Ham Park, Rahan Ahmed Amin was killed by a knife wound to his heart. Rahan was allegedly stabbed with a foot-long ninja-style sword. Rahan was 16 years old. His death was absolutely devastating for his family and for our community. And those who have been charged or arrested with Rahan's death were the same age or even younger. What happened to Rahan is simply appalling. And it comes after so many other cases of young lives destroyed, families devastated, communities broken by fear and distrust and struggling to heal. And that fear and that harm continues. Just last week, we had 3 separate stabbings in Newham. Last Monday, a 14-year-old boy was stabbed on a bus. Last Tuesday, one of our local teaching staff was stabbed in Wood Grange Road. And last Thursday evening, another man was also stabbed in Forest Gate. It's a testament to our police and to our NHS that no one died. For many, many years, this place has debated and passed laws on zombie knives and machetes. But these laws clearly haven't done the job. My constituents basically want to know from the Minister why he feels that the drip feed of small amendments to the law around knives haven't worked. Why are there loopholes? Why hasn't the government taken action to ban so-called ninja swords like the one that allegedly killed Rahan? And why are our existing laws so poorly enforced, especially online. I understand, and honourable members opposite, most of them, have alluded to the fact that knife crime is complex. None of us thinks that all access to knives can be prevented. And we all understand that there are many different causes that prompts a child or a young person to pick up a knife. So what we need surely is comprehensive action to tackle both the availability of knives and the root causes of knife crime. One cause of many young people's deaths in Newham has been involvement with the gangs, who groom and exploit young people, ruining lives for profit. Honourable members may remember that this is an agenda I've been banging on for about 7 years now, but I don't think we've actually got a grip on the criminal networks that cause this massive harm. In October 22, I published a report on child criminal exploitation. I talked to experts across the police, the schools, social services and charities. And one of our main recommendations was for the government to focus on disrupting those who control the organised criminals who groom our children. I'm obviously delighted that my honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, has pledged a new criminal offence of child criminal exploitation and a new strategy to go after the gangs who are profiting from the exploitation of our children.
The Honourable Member for giving way on that point, and I absolutely agree with her on this point, and I hope that the government will do something similar. But does she agree with me that it's also about the demand, supply and demand, but the demand, and that there are too many middle-class professionals who do probably not realise the crime and the exposure that young people are having to deal with behind their drug taking of cocaine or whatever it's going to be?
Do you know, I do absolutely agree with the Honourable Lady. I think that that people, some people buying drugs, cocaine and other kinds of drugs, think it's some kind of victimless crime, but it's not. We're seeing the impacts of those crimes in the deaths of our children and the grooming of our children and the destruction of so many young lives. So can I say that I am truly disappointed that the government hasn't made progress on a statutory definition of child criminal exploitation or making it a dedicated offence. I honestly believe that this would matter. The need for this to happen has been raised repeatedly over years, including by the Children's Commissioner and the Education Select Committee. So I'd be really grateful if the Minister could offer an update on this. Will the government be supporting and pushing through the private members' bill on a new offence put forward by the Honourable Member for Mole Valley? Or will they match Labour's commitment and create a new offence of child criminal exploitation in government time? And I think we all have to acknowledge that some of this is about wider social problems, like poverty and the lack of access to opportunity. These problems are getting so much worse due to the cost of living crisis, because poverty creates vulnerability to grooming. Poverty destroys a young person's trust in their future. So in closing, I want to mention the terrible rise in unmet need also for mental health treatment, particularly for young people. The truth is, our mental health services simply cannot cope with the level of need, and this is yet another devastating symptom of 14 years of Tory failure, where services have been trashed by a lack of desperately needed resources. We clearly need a joined-up approach. So I'd be grateful to know that the Minister is working across departments to identify the resources and the reforms that we desperately need. We need a government who will support early intervention across the board, in schools, in A&Es, through community organisations and youth work. But the record of this Conservative government is one of trashing prevention, dithering about getting deadly weapons off our street. So it's quite clear what my constituents need. They need a Labour government.
Steve Tuckwell.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you for calling me to speak in this incredibly timely debate. Everyone in this House today doesn't want knives on our streets. My constituents do not want knives on the streets of Uxbridge and South Ruislip. And I certainly do not want knives on the streets in the community that I've been elected to serve. One further day when just a single knife remains on our streets is a day too long, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's why the government's work to try and achieve this is welcomed. We have already seen in the last 4 years 120,000 knives have been taken off our streets. But there, of course, is more to be done. There always is. But this, I believe, provides an impetus of how we can navigate this issue. Other changes in law, including allowing courts to hand down longer custodial sentences, the seizure of weapons in suspect homes will go a long way, I believe, to complementing this, as will so-called hotspot policing and stop and search. These changes, Madam Deputy Speaker, cannot come soon enough, as I know those on the front bench recognise, especially for my residents in Uxbridge and South Ruislip and for law-abiding citizens across the capital. Madam Deputy Speaker, I heard earlier in the debate the reference to the knife angel. I'd like to pay tribute to Reverend Andy Thompson of St Margaret's Church in Uxbridge and other faith leaders across my constituency who have arranged for the knife angel to visit my constituency, which will benefit youth engagement on many of the points that have been talked about in this House today. However, it bears nothing to the context of London. Public safety and policing falls within the remit of the Mayor of London as the capital's Police and Crime Commissioner. It is for this, Madam Deputy Speaker, why the sudden U-turn on the police station in the by-election, in the run-up to the by-election. This is the same, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the same Mayor of London where instances of knife crime have grown over 50% since 2016 before he took office. This is the same Mayor of London who, under annual figures of knife crime, have swelled 22% to just under 14,000 in the most recent total. This is the same Mayor of London who is in charge of policing in our city, who now sees an average of 38 offences for knife crime per day. This is the same Mayor of London who will not talk about these figures. As my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, noted in a recent letter to the Mayor that figures for London were discounted from the national trend, we would see a 1% reduction on last year. This is a small figure, but it is a sign of progress. Yet in London, with nearly 14,000 instances of knife crime, the Office of National Statistics has suggested we can actually see a 5% increase. Madam Deputy Speaker, enough is enough. London can no longer be ignored by the current Mayor, who is also the Police and Crime Commissioner. Crime figures for London since 2016 have deteriorated against national trends, and our capital city deserves better. Thank you.
Paulette Hamilton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the past decade, the Tories have cut 21,000 police officers across the UK, and knife crime has gone up by 77%. This government's response has been completely inadequate. The serious violence strategy is more than 5 years out of date. The serious violence task force was disbanded. And everyone knows from their own communities that too little is being done to divert young people away from violence and crime. People in Erdington, King's Standing and Castle Vale have been left to face the consequences of Tory knife crime failure, and the B23 area postcode in my constituency has the highest rate of knife crime in the West Midlands, where 39 people were stabbed last year, and yet we have a single weapon surrender bin. If we are serious about ending the blight of knife crime in our communities, we need the government to be serious about funding. In the West Midlands, we have lost 2,221 officers and have had £175 million slashed from our budgets since the last Labour government. This is felt most harshly in areas that are already struggling. Of the 222 left behind neighbourhoods in the UK, 2 are in my constituency, and it is the 5th most deprived in the country. With the increase of county lines and gangs, young people don't feel safe to walk home, to school and from school. It's as simple as that. Even where my constituents have contacted the police, the massive funding failures and long waiting times in the criminal justice system means they very rarely see any justice. A constituent contacted me and told me that she had been raising the issues of a gang in her block following a recent stabbing. She tells me that when her neighbour was threatened with a knife by a group of young people and reported it to a PCSO, she was advised that the best thing she could do would be to make friends with the gang. One of the most worrying aspects of knife crime is the large proportion of youth violence across the UK. Too often, when a stabbing is reported in areas like Erdington, it is a child being stabbed by another child. This means that prevention is key, and departments must work together to prevent knife crime before it happens. I asked the Secretary of State for Education in March last year how many schools in my constituency use metal detectors to screen pupils and how many weapons were recovered as a result. Their answer was they couldn't tell me because they don't record this data. It is absolutely unbelievable that the Department for Education doesn't know how many schools across the country use metal detectors or even how successful they are. If we are missing this important preventative information, then what else are we missing? It just isn't good enough. It isn't right that people in Erdington and across the UK have to fear violent crime when they just walk to the shops or their children walk to school. The primary objective of any government must be to keep people safe, which is why it is so concerning that in total the Prime Minister has announced a ban on zombie knives 14 times. Since the government first attempted the ban in 2016, there has been a 24% increase in murders involving a knife or sharp instrument. Something clearly isn't working. Labour is committed to halving knife crime across the UK in the next decade, preventing further serious crime, youth offending in the tragic loss of life that comes with it. We would implement the guaranteed sanctions and serious interventions for young people found carrying knives, a referral for every offender to a youth offending team, and a mandatory bespoke action plan to prevent re-offending. Labour would completely crack down on the availability of knives on Britain's streets, including where further laws are required on online knife sales. It is clearly time for an election, Madam Deputy Speaker, because communities in my constituency and young people across the UK deserve better. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. One of the things that I enjoy about this job the most is when people come to see me at work. People come to visit the Palace of Westminster and I get to show them the place that I work. Because whatever they think of honourable members across this House, This building is theirs, this democracy is theirs, and I want to show them this wonderful place and why, Madam Deputy Speaker, it matters. And so a few months ago, I took a charity in my constituency called High Heritage round the House of Commons. And I obviously showed them the history of the building, and then we sat down and we had a conversation afterwards. And actually, on a bench in Westminster Hall next to me was actually the Honourable Member, who's just not in her place at the moment, the Honourable Member for Batley and Spen, who was talking to a school in her constituency as well. And she perhaps did a far better job talking to that school and extolling the virtues of her role as a Member of Parliament than I managed to do. But she was there, and I listened into her speech, and then I started to speak to the group of people that I brought to Westminster, this charity High Heritage. And one of the people there was a mother, Joyce, whose son, who is known as Alfred, only months earlier had been stabbed and murdered, a Peterborough lad who had been stabbed and murdered while he was at university, actually, in Northampton rather than in Peterborough. And what she said, will never kind of leave me. What she said to the group of people that had come to Parliament, she said, let's not shy away from this conversation about knife crime, because it's our children and our young people who need to know the devastating effects that carrying a knife can have. And the question I asked her, what do you think the government need to do? What can we do in order to get that message clear to young people that carrying a knife is unacceptable and to get knives off the street? And she said, quite honestly, that would be a tough and a zero-tolerance approach, because only tough love is going to stop young people carrying knives. And that really did hit home, because this is a mother who's lost a son. This is a mother who's determined that something good can come out of perhaps the most appalling thing you can imagine as a parent. And that has left me and will always remain with me. I remember also another conversation I had in Cathedral Square, where Joyce was speaking, and she was speaking again to a number of people about her terrible experience. But I also spoke to a man called Andrew Bowley, who was stabbed 5 times in Peterborough in 2017, and told me about his experience. He was stabbed 5 times. And this man was able to live and then dedicate a good proportion of his life to talk about his experience and why knife crime is so appalling. But it's still happening, and it's still happening in Peterborough, because while this is good news, because we saw arrests, the fact that it comes from such a devastating incident is obviously not good. Peterborough teens who carried out brutal knife attacks in a city park had been locked up. These were 5 young people who have been jailed for a maximum of around 70 years collectively between them. Some of them are getting 19 years, and I'm pleased they're getting really tough sentences. But not only have they ruined the lives of the people that they attacked, will have to suffer from the consequences of those attacks for many years, they've also ruined their own lives. And they're also going to be in prison for an extremely long time. And that is obviously good in the sense that potentially very violent people are off the street and the public is safe. But it's tragic to see 5 more lives ruined. So what else do I want to talk about in this speech? I just want to reflect on what we talked about, that zero tolerance and tough approach. Just park that for a second and I'll come back to that, because I just do want to just pay tribute to those. I think Peterborough at the end of last year, the police had a knife amnesty, and that was 170 blades, knives and offensive weapons that were taken off the streets. They can no longer be used in the way we wouldn't want them to be used, and that's good. And I think 120,000, I heard the statistics earlier, 120,000 knives have been taken off the streets thanks to amnesties, and that's obviously a good thing. And I also understand that a criminal justice bill is going through Parliament, and a criminal justice bill will create new offences and again ensure that we do what we can to tackle knife crime. But I'm going to tell you my own opinion, and my opinion, I think, of Joyce, because I know that for carrying a knife, I think the maximum sentence is 4 years, and many people on a repeat offence are going to prison on a very regular basis. But I want to see the zero tolerance and tough approach that Joyce advocated. I think there's no excuse for carrying a knife in public. There's no excuse for carrying a knife in public. And I know lots of young people, unfortunately, get themselves drawn into difficult circumstances, but the message needs to go loud and clear from this place that if you're carrying an offensive weapon, you're carrying a knife, a bladed weapon, some of the weapons that we're hearing about, zombie knives, etc., then you will go to prison. You will receive a custodial sentence. And in my mind, only that zero tolerance, tough approach is going to get that message through to people and through to families and parents that if they allow their children to get involved in knife crime, they will ruin their lives and they will go to prison. And prison is the least worst option for them, because equally it could obviously end up dead, and no one wants to see that happen at all. No one goes into politics. No one goes into politics in this place. No one becomes a politician because they don't want to see a solution to an issue like knife crime. And this should be a cross-party approach. And I just want to just say very gently to some of the members opposite, who I respect and like enormously, and I know many of them care so deeply about their constituencies and the communities that they represent. But as soon as we start bringing party politics into this, people like Joyce, people like the young people that I spoke to, like High Heritage, they switch off. And I know people are pointing opposite. I'm not saying it's guilty of any one side. But once we start talking about plans with the word Labour inserted in front of it, and only this is ever going to resolve any of the problems because it's written by some bright spark at Labour HQ, people turn off. That's not what this debate should be all about. This debate should be about what we see in our constituencies, what we can do to solve it, and what we can do as members of Parliament, whether you've got the word Conservative or Labour or Liberal next to your name, what we can do as people rooted in our communities, elected by our people, to listen to our local people, what we can do to stamp out knife crime in our constituencies. I can sit here and talk about the need for a zero tolerance approach. I can sit here and talk about what I think needs to happen, that by carrying a knife, if you're caught carrying a knife, then you should go to prison. Yes, I agree with that. But deep in our communities, we can do what I did, and I'm sure many honourable members in this House have done. We can listen to Joyce. We can listen to the High Heritage charity. We can listen to the people affected and impacted by knife crime, and we can be their advocates. And I know many members of Parliament on both sides do this. It's just a shame that in this debate we didn't articulate that more clearly.
Thank you. Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the 6th of January, 2 people were convicted of the murder of Calab Legesse, a 29-year-old young man who was stabbed on the 30th of December 2022 in Peckham Rye Park in the neighbouring constituency to my own, while being robbed of his mobile phone. Calab was my constituent. He was a graduate and the oldest son in his family, very much loved by everyone who knew him. Calab was killed by a single stab wound to the heart with a large hunting knife, which was later found at the home of one of his attackers. On Monday the 4th of September, I stood at the police line on Angeltown Estate in my constituency following the murder of 21-year-old Ronaldo Scott with a huge knife in broad daylight. On the 3rd of October, I stood at a police line on Cold Harbour Lane following the murder of another young man who I cannot name due to legal proceedings, again with a huge knife. Just last Monday, another stabbing took place, this time of a 19-year-old on the Kingswood estate, who thankfully survived his injuries. Each time such horrific events take place, a family has its heart ripped out, and the wider community are devastated and traumatised. Young people are left terrified to leave their home. Parents are left feeling fearful each moment their child is out of their sight. Knife crime extinguishes lives, but it also snuffs out hope, aspiration, any sense of a better future. Madam Deputy Speaker, knife crime is not inevitable. It is not a normal part of life that we accept just happens in some places. It is not acceptable. It is not unsolvable. It has been allowed to spiral under this government because of the political choices they have made. The political choice to make local authorities bear the brunt of austerity, seeing the resources which funded youth work,
early help and support for families, Sure Start centres, play equipment, community centres stripped away year after year for more than a decade. The political choice to take £1 billion out of the budget for the Metropolitan Police Service, decimating neighbourhood policing, the bedrock of good police-community relations, damaging the trust and confidence of communities in policing. And the political choice to do literally nothing about the growth in the use of the most dangerous bladed weapons, zombie knives, machetes and ninja swords, despite promising to do so since 2016, repeatedly saying that they would do so when parliamentary time allows, as if they were not the same government who has control over the allocation of parliamentary time and can choose to prioritise whatever issues they like. This government has chosen not to prioritise taking the most dangerous weapons off our street. Weapons which are, as the clinical director of the King's College Hospital Emergency Department in my constituency described to me as weapons of war, capable of inflicting horrific injuries, breaking bones, slicing through internal organs, often leaving victims with no chance of survival, and those who do survive with life-changing consequences. The ban they have now announced is partial and has significant loopholes. The appalling losses we have seen in my constituency have led to some exceptional work to tackle serious violence. I want to pay particular tribute to Ecosystem Cold Harbour, who are funded by the Mayor of London's Violence Reduction Unit's My Ends programme. Ecosystem brings together a number of trusted local community organisations who work with young people and families. For the last 3 years, they have been delivering a range of positive activities for young people to help them pursue their ambitions, trauma support for people affected by serious violence, and grant funding for a range of smaller community organisations to be able to deliver targeted interventions, including an extraordinary group of women who go by the name Circle of Life Ignite, all of whom have lost a child to knife crime, who are campaigning to install bleed stop kits to provide the emergency intervention that is needed when a stabbing happens in memory of the children they have lost. I have no words to express the courage of women who are turning their own tragedies into hope so that other victims do not have to die. Ecosystem are showing how serious violence can be tackled at a community level. And this is the approach that the next Labour government will implement across the country. Young Futures partnerships will bring together community organisations with local councils, the police, youth justice services and others to provide targeted support to young people at risk of serious violence. We will ensure that mental health support is available for young people in every community in the country. And we will close the loopholes in the partial, piecemeal ban on large knives that the government has announced. We will act where the Conservatives have failed. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to give the last word to a young constituent named Joshua Ayakware, who wrote a poem about the work of Ecosystem. Joshua writes, "See, in the ecosystem, we show the young people that there's a better way. Give them the tools to succeed and make a better place. Just give them the space to grow, to learn and to feel free, and show them peace and happiness are what they can achieve. So let's celebrate our young people, because they are our future, our next leaders and heroes, so let's make them feel super. To give them a better life, let's give them love and our time. And one day the darkness will fade because we taught them how to shine. This work in our communities is having an impact. It is genuinely transformative. But those in my community who work to tackle serious violence and those across the country who do the same need more leadership and support from central government. That is the leadership that a Labour government will provide, and we need a general election so that it can be delivered.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I say this government is letting our young people and communities down when it comes to tackling the devastating impact of knife crime. Under the Tories, knife crime has gone up by more than 77% since 2015. And sadly, it's towns like Luton where we have seen the tragic consequences. So I rise to speak today to support Labour's motion to press upon the government to strengthen its legislation and to not only ban zombie-style knives and machetes, but to also ban ninja swords and other dangerous knives that would remain legal under their plans as they stand. But if we're to reduce the needless loss of young lives, we must do more than legislate and enforce our way through. Although we need to, of course, ensure that carrying knives and knife crime has real consequences, but we also need to see real support in place to stop our young people feeling they need to carry knives and being drawn into knife crime. So I support Labour's knife crime plan, including guaranteed sanctions and serious interventions for young people found carrying knives, with tough new guidance so that there is use of serious penalties such as curfews and tagging where appropriate. But I want to focus my speech around Labour's Young Futures Early Intervention Programme, a targeted programme in every area to identify young people most at risk of knife crime. A plan which will bring together services at a local level to better coordinate delivery of preventative measures, a national network of youth hubs to deliver joined-up support for young people, a plan for youth mental health with support in every school and open access hubs in every community, with action to tackle mental health waiting lists too, and a programme which will see youth workers in A&E units, custody centres and in our communities with mentors in pupil referral units to better target and support young people at risk. And this will be alongside a new serious organised crime strategy to go after the gangs, making millions from the exploitation of children and young people in our communities. In Luton, we've sadly seen too many young people and children killed by other young people and children. Lives lost and changed forever for all involved, especially their families who are left behind. And I've listened to families whose children have been killed, and it's heartbreaking. And I've listened to our Luton community who don't want to see yet another young life lost in our town, and it's heartbreaking. And it's heartbreaking because so much loss could have been prevented. It could have been prevented except for the political decisions of this Conservative government, which has destroyed youth services, which carry out vital preventative work. This government which has diminished neighbourhood policing for its visible presence and intelligence to help our communities feel safe. And this government which has failed to deal with the criminal gangs that exploit and draw our young people into knife crime. Yet despite this sorry picture of 14 years of Conservative government stripping back our public services and making huge cuts to councils all in the name of austerity, we do have some hope through excellent partnership working at a local level, such as the Luton Youth Partnership and the multi-agency support hub work, which is a systemic approach developed over a number of years, led by Dave Collins at Luton Council. And I pay tribute to the work that he and so many others involved in this collaboration approach carry out. And it is a collaborative approach that is at the heart of Labour's Young Futures programme, with a cross-government initiative to oversee it, bringing together all relevant departments to set objectives, oversee delivery and assess outcomes. And importantly, Labour will work with local councils to establish new Youth Futures partnerships to build on existing successes, such as in Luton, to coordinate and better integrate existing services for teenagers and young people in their areas, involving council youth services, including youth offending services, social services and community safety officers, with the police, with mental health services, schools and voluntary and community organisations to map the provision of services, establish data and systems to identify children and young people at risk of exploitation and crime, and establish appropriate referral and intervention. And so I'd like to emphasise at this point the importance of the excellent work our voluntary and community organisations in Luton do. Many have had to pick up the pieces after Conservative cuts to our local council and health services, but working together to support our young people and community, be it from our local youth groups such as with the Scouts and Guides, mentorship by groups such as Unleashing Potential, as well as grassroots community activists such as the excellent Wingman Mentors, who I recently met with my honourable friend, the member for Luton North. And they told us about their campaign, Similarly, to get more bleed kits in community locations, recognising that we're not able to fully prevent stabbings, we can try to ensure that lives might be saved by the early use of bleed kits by local people on the scene before paramedics arrive. So to close, we know that knife crime destroys lives, devastates families, and creates fear and trauma in our communities. Our young people deserve better, and I say that a Labour government will give young people their future back, but we need that general election to do so.
Zarah Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I just want it to stop. I just don't want it to be happening here, where there are little kids playing in the park. That, Madam Deputy Speaker, is how one Coventry teen described how he felt growing up in the shadow of knife crime. And he's far from alone. In the national media, knife crime is often talked about as if it's just a London thing, but the truth is it touches young people across the country. 1 in 6 children between the ages of 13 and 17 reported being victims of violence last year, and around half say that violence or the fear of violence affects their day-to-day lives. And things are particularly bad in the West Midlands. According to data from last year, the region had the highest rate of knife crime of anywhere in the country. 178 offences per 100,000 people. That's 5 times higher than North Yorkshire, which ranked bottom. And nationally, knife crime is up a shocking 77% since 2015. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, while this House is unanimous in recognising the problem, too often politicians look for quick fixes or put seemingly tough above providing real answers. And what's striking about knife crime is that we know what drives it and we know what reduces it. And that's not easy Daily Mail headline grabbing answers. It's not a matter of locking up more kids for longer while ignoring the drivers of the real problem. Like the actor Idris Elba has warned, and I'd like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to his work in campaigning on this issue, since custodial sentences for young people associated with high levels of reoffending, proposals like mandatory prison sentences for first-time knife possession are likely to draw young people further into criminality, while failing to tackle the causes of why young people carry knives in the first place. Part of the answer is closing loopholes in the ban on the sale of dangerous weapons, but it's not the whole story. As those familiar with the issue know too well, Britain has a clear example of how to tackle knife crime. 2 decades ago, Glasgow was known as one of the murder capitals of Europe, with one of the highest rates of homicides in the global north. But rather than a simple law and order response, a public health approach was taken which sought to diagnose and prevent violence rather than just reacting after the event. This involved increasing support for young people at risk of getting swept up in violence, and after 10 years, the number of hospital admissions from knife attacks had fallen by 62%. Again, it might not make Daily Mail headlines, but the evidence is there. If young people at risk are offered extracurricular activities like sports programs, if they are offered talking therapy, if they are enrolled in mentoring programs, they are less likely to get caught up in knife crime. Yes, I'll give way.
Thank you very much. I hear what the Honourable Lady is saying about providing services and alternatives for young people, but does she also believe in a serious deterrent and enforcement? And would she agree that if you are caught carrying an offensive weapon or a knife, that a custodial sentence is the most appropriate punishment?
I thank the Honourable Member for that question. Like I mentioned in my speech just now, in this chamber we are often really quick to resort to law and order and custodial sentences, and actually that is not the whole response. You're not fixing the problem. And as I will later on go to talk about, there is an issue around poverty and deprivation, but we are not giving young people hope, we are not giving them opportunities, and that is something that people don't really want to talk about. It's a long-term strategy, involves investing, and what we've seen over the past 14 years is the complete opposite. We've seen youth centres closed down, we have seen schools stretched beyond measure in terms of coping with the pressures that young people experience. So, yeah, it's not the only response, and it's not what we should always fall back on. Going back to what I was saying, In Coventry, we have seen a significant fall in youth crime after an approach similar to what we have seen in Glasgow. Launched in May 2023, the Community Initiative to Reduce Violence programme has sought to identify young people at risk and offered them tailored support to help develop positive routes away from violence, from assisting with housing, health and debt, to access to education. And after 6 months, this programme has been credited with helping cut knife crime almost half in Coventry. Of course, there is more work to be done. And just this weekend, 2 young people were stabbed in separate incidents in the city, and my thoughts go to them and their families. But the evidence clearly shows that providing support for young people at risk, rather than just abandoning them, is the root of this problem. And Madam Deputy Speaker, that's how we address this issue at a deeper level as well. Because while we must roll out these violence reduction approaches across the country, and I'm pleased that Labour's Young Futures programme sets to do that, we know that knife crime has a deeper structural cause as well. There is a wealth of evidence that these social ills are correlated to deprivation and inequality, with countries that have higher levels of inequality and poverty being more likely to have higher rates of violent crime. And this isn't surprising. When young people are abandoned, when job opportunities disappear, when their futures look bleak, it's little wonder that people are angry and feel hopeless. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will finish with this. The answer to kids being scared of knife crime in Coventry isn't locking up more young people for longer. The answer isn't just banning dangerous weapons, however needed that is. The fundamental answer is through offering young people a route away from these problems by giving them the support that they need to get on and giving them hope in their future. And that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is what the next Labour government must do.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's an honour to follow my honourable friend from Coventry South and to be the last speaker in this debate, which I have to say, on the whole, with one exception, has been thoughtful, insightful, heartfelt and really sensitive. I rise to speak today on behalf of my constituents in Luton North that I know care a great deal about knife crime. And when I say care, what I mean is worry and are scared about knife crime. Because there is no doubt that knife crime has become a national crisis, increasing by 77% since 2015. It is a scourge on our society, and it has tragic and often fatal consequences. Knife crime not only takes lives, but it also devastates families. It destroys futures and ambitions and has a detrimental ripple effect on all of our communities. We unfortunately know the impact of this all too well in Luton, as my honourable friend from Luton South has already highlighted. In September 2023 alone, in just 1 month, there were 5 stabbings in our town, one of which tragically led to my constituent, 16-year-old Ashraf Habimana, losing his life. 2 loving parents lost their son. Ashraf's teachers and friends lost his bright and energetic personality, and our community has lost another young person under appallingly violent and, importantly, avoidable circumstances. His family and friends now have to grieve the loss of Ashraf and wait hopefully to see justice served, but the lasting trauma of this event will remain with them and our community forever. 2 years ago, another 16-year-old boy, Hamza Hussain, was stabbed to death outside school. What another tragic loss. What another waste of life. What another future stolen. Our young people are the ones most at risk when it comes to knife crime. In the year ending September 2022, there were over 46,000 recorded offences involving a knife or sharp instrument in England and Wales, with young men and boys most likely to be both the perpetrators and victims of this crime. I recently had the honour of meeting with Bedfordshire's brilliant Violence and Exploitation Reduction Unit with my honourable friend from Luton South to find out more about their Just Drop It knife campaign. At its heart is the voice and experience of a mum, Roseanne, who tragically lost her young son, Azan AJ Kaleem, in 2018. Too often, nothing is done when there are signs that a young person is getting into trouble, being groomed by gangs or falls into danger online. To me, the important part of today is about the child exploitation side of it. The side of it which this government has lagged behind. And I don't care whether it has Labour or Conservative on the front of it. Parents, families, communities just want it done. To me, the people that prey on innocent young lives, regardless of what their intentions were, whether it's crime, whether it's sexual exploitation, whether it's drugs, they're all the same, and we should treat them exactly like that. When teenagers say they don't feel safe, or they're struggling themselves with trauma or abuse, no one listens and no help is provided, this is what we are up against. The Just Drop It strategy aims to tackle these issues, providing accessible opportunities to young people to help them achieve their potentials, ensuring that they feel supported and safe, and helping them to realise there is an alternative to a life of knife crime and violence. All of these young men, all of these young boys, all families left mourning the loss of life and the loss of a future that should have been bright and, importantly, safe. A brilliant organisation called Boxing Saves Lives works with hundreds of young people in Luton. It was set up and run by the inspirational JP. He often highlights work, quite rightly, which goes on tackling violence against women and girls. But he asks, what about violence against boys and men? I couldn't agree with him more. Far too many young boys are exposed to violence and fear from a very young age. What is the Minister doing to tackle this? And if they are taking any action, why isn't it working? If this was a physical illness killing our young people, teams of doctors and researchers would be working day and night to find a cure. But we already know what the cure is. We know the lessons that need to be learned. The cure is all the things that have been stripped from our communities for the last 14 years. Decent community policing, youth centres, decent schools, Sure Start centres, decent housing, mental health support, tackling poverty. My honourable friend from Luton South says, shockingly, there are more food banks than there are police stations. The results of knife crime have no political stripe. But how we have got here does. These were all political choices that led to the perfect storm of knife crime that we see as in our society today. When we held community meetings after young Ashraf's death, hundreds of people came and they said, here we are again. And they were right, sadly. And sadly, until all the things that we know that work are put in place, we will be here yet again. So when the Minister stands at the dispatch box, please don't give us more warm words which lead to cold comfort for those families, when I know it is only a matter of time before we are consoling yet another mother in Luton. Families are losing their children, children are losing their friends, and whole parts of the country are losing their future. And it is a situation that should shame a government of any colour. So please don't get at that dispatch box and tell us it's all rosy, because it's not. All the while the Tory government fails our communities, I am grateful that we have people in Luton like Halima Ali, who is fundraising for critical bleed kits in our town, and the Wingman Mentors, a not-for-profit organisation that works with vulnerable young people who are on the cusp of getting involved with crime, carrying knives and serious violence. They've also launched a campaign to install critical bleed kits in strategic locations across our town. These kits contain essential medical supplies designed to control severe bleeding effectively and can be used in the event of an emergency incident, whether that be a road traffic accident, a dog attack or a knife crime. And I would be grateful to hear if the Minister will be supporting that. The founders, Sia and Michelle of that organisation, believe these kits are just as vital and life-saving as defibrillators. They are also delivering training on familiarising themselves with bleed kits and practical utilisation of these tools to give those who may be on the scene as zero responders the necessary skills to possibly save a life. And while I pay tribute to the vitally important work that Wingman Mentors and others are doing, they should not have to rely on donations and funding from local businesses to make installation of bleed kits a reality. And yes, we have heard that this is a cross-party problem and that we have to work across organisations and across parties, and I am happy to do so. But the government and their response has been wholly inadequate to this issue. The serious violence strategy is more than 5 years out of date. The Serious Violence Task Force was disbanded, and everyone knows from their own communities that too little is being done to support young people away from violence and crime. And why is it that we have to continue with this absolute farce of police funding that Bedfordshire Police is classified as a rural police force? We have Luton, we have Dunstable, we have Bedford, all enclosed in that. Would the Minister please dare to comment on that and when that farce of rural funding for Bedfordshire Police will end? Much more needs to be done, and we need a proper plan and a meaningful funding behind it to make these changes. I am therefore proud to support Labour's commitment to tackling this issue at its source, establishing a new Young Futures programme to stop young people being drawn into crime, implementing a total crackdown on the availability of knives on our streets and imposing tougher sentences for perpetrators. Knife crime and violence has no place in our society. We all have a responsibility to tackle this problem within our communities. And tackling knife crime doesn't just mean learning lessons anymore, but acting on them until we are not standing here again, speaking of constituents, of loved ones tragically lost to knife crime, and those left behind who are traumatised and changed forever.
Shadow Minister Farrell Clark.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to start by expressing my thanks to the members across the House for their powerful contributions this afternoon. They include the member for Bristol South, Batley Spen, member for West Ham, Birmingham, Erdington, member for Peterborough, the member for Dulwich and West Norwood, Luton South, Coventry South, Luton North, the member for Cities of London, Uxbridge and the rest. They all spoke powerfully about the tragedies that knife crime causes to victims and families. These attacks have become far too deadly and far too frequent, especially for young people, as we have heard this afternoon. They ruin lives, families and communities. I speak for the whole House when I say this must be stopped. Zombie-style weapons and ninja swords must be banned, but they are currently far too accessible. A quick Google search not only brings up the heartbreaking stories of the weapons being used, but also it shows where you can easily buy them. They are readily available on marketplaces for as little as under £40. This cannot go on. We should not have to be here today talking about banning of zombie knives. If the government's ban had worked in 2016 and it had gone far enough, more lives could have been saved. We must act now and introduce criminal sanctions for online marketplaces. Let me also thank the members for Batley and Spen, but all the members for raising the alarming high levels of knife crime across our country. I will remind the member for Bexley, Sidcup, that the knife crime is up 77% since 2015 across this country, not just in one city. Yet, less than half of knife possession offences led to a formal sanction last year. This is law and order in Tory Britain in 2024. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is young men who are most likely to be both the offenders and victims of this crime. Young men who have their whole lives ahead of them, like the 17-year-old boy who was stabbed with a zombie knife in my constituency of Enfield North only 2 weeks ago, like Caleb and Ronaldo from Dulwich and West Norwood, Alfred in Peterborough, Robert and Bradley in Batley and Spen, Ashraf in Luton North, Rohan in West Ham, the 39 people in Birmingham and Erdington, and hundreds of young people whose names we did not know today. Each loss shocks a family and a community, but too little is being done to divert young people away from violence and crime. Our young people deserve better. They are not being dealt a fair hand. And this is not just the case in Enfield or in Birmingham. This is happening up and down the country. Madam Deputy Speaker, this demands instant action. These weapons have no place in the hands of anyone on our streets, never mind children in parks and playgrounds. So what has the government been waiting for? A celebrity to step in so they have to act? This is what it feels like to so many across the country. We've had 17 press releases from the government regarding zombie and zombie-style knives since 2015, as we have heard today. Yet, a full ban is still not in place. What is the government waiting for? As put very eloquently by my friend from West Ham, the drip feed of small amendments to the law has not worked. For many, it feels like there is no end in sight. Now, I'm relieved that a new ban is coming in place, but we would not be here today if the first press release had actually meant something. If the government's ban in 2016 had gone far enough and actually worked, if the Tories had delivered on their promise to keep our community safe. But sadly, this is a tired, hopeless government, unable to deliver for the families across our country. Madam Deputy Speaker, let's be clear. This ban needs to go further. It needs to cover ninja swords and other dangerous swords. However, the Minister for Crime, Policing and Fire on the government's benches recently said that if there are other things, referring to weapons or blades, that need to be brought into scope, then they can do it much quicker. My question is, why wait if you can ban these weapons now? Why should we wait for the criminals to shift to other weapons of choice? There is no reason why we should let criminals win at the expense of grieving families. As we have heard today, the consequences of not closing these loopholes are devastating. That is why we are calling for the government's ban to go further now. Because with each day that passes, young people in particular are at risk of having their future taken away from them. We can't prevent this. I want to stress that ninja swords should not be accessible at a click of a button. Exactly. Ronan Kanda was murdered by a 22-inch ninja sword. This weapon was ordered online using someone else's identification and collected without any identification. How can it be this easy to commit a crime of this kind? I think members across the House can agree that there are very few legitimate reasons to own and carry a 22-inch sword in this country on our streets. And this is exactly why we are debating this motion today, because it has become far too easy to own and use these weapons on our streets, with far too few consequences for doing so. This is the culture which has been allowed to thrive under this government across Britain. This must stop. Labour will close the loophole, allowing marketplaces to escape liability for dangerous knife sales online. I will give it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the Honourable Member giving way. I just want to ask the same question I asked the Honourable Member for Coventry South. Would she agree that someone caught in possession of a knife or a bladed weapon that she describes, do you think they should go to prison?
Well, currently, as I've said, with young people who are caught with blade, nothing is being done. They've been allowed to go 50%. Nothing is being done in those cases. So I think that honourable members should actually question the ministers about that. I will continue. As I touched on earlier, Madam Deputy Speaker, too little is being done to give young people the best start in life. Too often, when teenagers say they don't feel safe, or they are struggling themselves with trauma, abuse, mental health, no one listens and no help is provided. As put very eloquently by my friend, the member for Bristol South, community services have just disappeared. This government has hollowed out our youth services, our mental health services, the policing teams, among others. In fact, over the last 14 years, there has been no serious cross-government effort to stop young people from being drawn into crime. And who pays the price? Young people, victims, families, communities like mine in Enfield North and all over our country. But they cannot wait any longer. We need early intervention to stop young people from being drawn into crime on our streets in the first place. That's why That's what Labour will do with our Young Futures programme. We will invest in our young people and bring together a national network of youth hubs in our communities with joined-up multi-agency targeted work, putting youth workers in A&E units, mental health workers in schools, making sure they are on hand to help our young people when it matters most, giving them the best possible start in life. That will support our aim of halving serious violence, including knife crime and youth violence, within a decade. We will step in where the government has failed. The communities across the country are behind our plans, so why isn't the government? We did it in the last government, we did it in government before, and we can do it again. Madam Deputy Speaker, the crisis in knife crime is urgent and cannot be ignored any longer. The government needs to get a grip and put an end to this suffering. If their ban had been successful, we would not be debating this issue here today. We need the ban on zombie-style knives to go much further. We need to introduce a criminal sanction for websites that indirectly sell illegal weapons online. And in the long term, we need to support our young people to prevent them from being dragged into crime in the first place. I think we all agree in this House that our young people deserve better. We must give them the best possible start in life, keep them safe. That's why I urge all members from across the House to do the right thing and vote for Labour's motion to get the weapons off our street. Thank you.
Minister Chris Phil.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you very much. And I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to come here today and talk about this important topic. I'd like to thank members on both sides who contributed thoughtfully to this afternoon's debate, which is one of huge importance to our constituents up and down the country. Too many families have been touched by the tragedy of knife crime, the unspeakable agony of losing a loved one. And in fact, by coincidence, this was arranged before this debate was scheduled. I met yesterday with quite a few families from across London who had lost sons, I think a daughter in one case, and brothers to knife crime around London. And that group of families included the cousins of Eliane Andam, a 17-year-old girl from Croydon, the borough that I represent in Parliament, who was tragically murdered on Wednesday, the 27th of September last year by an assailant who is the alleged assailant who is in custody now. And I remember attending her funeral a few weeks later in Croydon. The outpouring of grief from the whole community, but particularly from her parents, Michael and Dorcas, and her little brother, Kobe, was something that I think moved everybody who attended. There were over 1,000 people attended that funeral on that Saturday morning a couple of months ago. And I think nothing illustrated more powerfully how important this topic is than seeing those family members and that whole community united in grief at Eliane's loss. And of course there are too many families like the Andam family up and down the country, in London, but also elsewhere, who have suffered tragedy in that way. And I think it's up to all of us in public life, whether here in Parliament or in city government, police and crime commissioners, local councils, and so on, to do everything we possibly can to deal with this issue. And it's in that spirit that I think many members have approached today's debate. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've heard quite a lot about figures today, and I think any debate, any informed debate, has to start with a proper understanding of what the figures are. Everyone knows there's more that we need to do, but we do need to start off with a proper understanding of the figures. Now, a number of opposition members have quoted the 77% since 2015 figure. That is a police-recorded crime figure. There are a number of other figures available. And let me just say, when it comes to police-recorded crime, here is what the Office for National Statistics say. They say police-recorded crime does not tend to be a good indicator of general trends in crime for higher volume offences. That's not me, that's the Office for National Statistics. And I'll just explain why that is. It's because police-recorded crime depends on the propensity of the public to report it and how good a job the police do at then recording it when it is reported. And over the I will just in a moment. And over the last, I'll just make the point about statistics, and I will give way. And over the last few years, largely driven by Her Majesty's Inspectorate and their crime data integrity initiatives, the police have got a lot better at always recording offences. Now, if you ask the ONS what is the more reliable measure, they say, and again I quote, "The crime survey of England and Wales remains the best estimate of long-term trends in crime against the population for offences that are in the survey." And if I turn to that Crime Survey of England and Wales, according to the Office for National Statistics, I quote, "the best estimate of long-term trends," they show since March 2010, a reduction of 51% specifically in violent crimes. I'm not talking about all crimes, I'm talking about violent crimes in particular. It was 1.841 million in the year ending March 2010. The year ending September 23, the most recent year available, it had gone down by about 1 million offences, or 51%, to 894,000 offences. But there are other measures. I will give way to the Shadow Home Secretary, but then I will give way to her honourable friend after that.
Thank the Policing Minister for giving way. Would he agree with the ONS when they say police recorded crime provides a better measure than the crime survey for England and Wales of higher harm but less common types of violence, such as those involving a knife or sharp instrument, knife-enabled crime? Would he agree that knife crime has gone up by 77% since 2015, and that is a deep, deep tragedy for our country?
Well, I would agree that for lower volume crime, police recorded crime does provide an accurate measure. And of course, the principal example of that, which is relevant here, is homicide. And I've got the homicide figures for the Shadow Home Secretary since she asked about police recorded crime for lower volume serious offences. Now, in the year ending March 2020, the last year that she was in government, there were 620 homicides. In the 12 months ending September 2023, the most recent period for which data is available, those homicide figures had declined. They'd gone down from 620 homicides when the Right Honourable Lady was in government, down to 591 homicides in the most recent period. Now, every one of those homicides is a tragedy. It's one homicide too many, but it's gone down. It's gone down. Even though the population has grown significantly, the number of homicides has gone down in that period. Now, I did promise to give way to the member for Luton North, so I'll do so.
I thank the Minister for being generous with the time and giving way. On the issue of police recorded crime, surely 77% would be the bare minimum, since the level of underreporting, particularly with young people, is extremely high. And would he agree with me that this arguing about knife crime saying that it's gone down, this claim from the government that knife crime has somehow gone down, will sit with a bucket of cold sick with communities like mine that know the scourge of knife crime is rife under a Tory government?
Minister? Well, it's not. Look, no one is suggesting that knife crime isn't a problem that needs dealing with. I'm just giving the Honourable Lady and the House the facts. And when it comes to the most accurate measure of higher volume crimes, according to the Office for National Statistics, since 2010, that has gone down by 51%, and homicide has gone down as well. Now, let me just take another measure of serious crime, and that is hospital admissions following a stab injury. Because, quite frankly, if anyone is, I'm just going to finish the point, if I may, and then move on, because there are a lot more to talk about besides the statistics. But if someone is stabbed, they will go to hospital. So one of the measures we look at in the Home Office is the number of hospital admissions with an injury caused by a bladed article, that is to say a knife. And since 2019, those hospital admissions have gone down by 21%. Now, I don't mention these figures out of complacency, and I don't mention these figures to score some political point. I'm mentioning these figures that are endorsed by the ONS just to make sure the House has an accurate and sober assessment. Now, having said all of that, I do want to move on. Having said all of that, I do want to talk about prevention, about the law, and about enforcement. let me start with prevention. Now.
It's obvious the Minister's not taking an intervention at this point, sir. Minister.
Several times on the point about figures, and I've explained in detail where the figures come from.
Order. Point of order, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I do want to give the Minister the opportunity to make sure he is not providing inaccurate information to the House. He has implied that the ONS believes that the crime survey, rather than the police recorded crime survey, is the... No, this is about the factual information from the ONS.
And don't speak during a point of order. Yvette Cooper.
There is a factual point about what the ONS believes is the most accurate measure to use for knife crime. I have quoted at the Minister the ONS's words about the police recorded survey being the most accurate measure for knife crime. The Minister has tried to deny that this is the case. I want to give him the opportunity to give accurate information to the House and be clear that the police recorded survey, which shows knife crime has gone up over the last 8 years, is the one that the ONS recommends.
Thank you. Not a point of order. It's very kind of everyone to tell me how to do what I am in the process of doing. The Right Honourable Lady knows that what she has just said is a point of debate, not a point of order for the Chair. So if she's asking me to answer a point of order, my answer to her is it's not a point of order, and it's not for me to adjudicate from the Chair as to how any statistics should be interpreted. Now, I should warn, the Right Honourable Lady knows that the Minister was not taking an intervention from her. He has the floor, it's up to him, and she shouldn't use a point of order in order to make a point of debate. But she has now done it, and I'm sure that the Minister will answer. Minister.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you for dealing with that point of debate disguised as a point of order. So I will just reiterate what I said before. The Office for National... I'll just quote again what the Office for National Statistics said. Police recorded crime does not tend to be a good indicator of general trends in crime. Okay, for higher volume crime. They say, and I quote again, the Crime Survey of England and Wales remains the best estimate of long-term trends in crimes against the household. Violent crime, according to the Crime Survey, is down by 51% since 2010. And when you look at one of those lower volume crimes where they say that police recorded crime is more appropriate, and I obviously accept what the ONS say, homicide has gone down from 620 to 591, and that is buttressed by the reduction in hospital admissions of 21% since 2019. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will move on now to address the question of prevention.
Before the Minister moves on, the backbenches are being really quite well behaved. Thank you. This front bench and this front bench are shouting at each other across the table while the Minister's on his feet. Now stop it, Minister.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've had worse. But I thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for your assistance. It's gratefully received, as always. Now, let me move on to the question of prevention, which members on both sides of the House have rightly raised. Of course, we want to prevent young people getting into a path which leads to committing acts of violence. We want to intervene early and take someone at the age of maybe as young as 12 and put them onto a path where they don't become that 16 or 17-year-old perpetrator. And in fact, this was a topic of discussion, as members can imagine, at the meeting I had yesterday, which was attended actually by the London Violence Reduction Unit. Now, we're funding violence reduction units in the 20 police force areas most effective this current year to the tune of £55 million. And that funds interventions like mentoring schemes. It funds things like apprenticeships. It funds work experiences. It even funds things like cognitive behavioural therapy, where there is a really good evidence base that that intervention can take a young person who is at risk of heading onto the wrong path and putting them back into a better direction. We're also working with the Youth Endowment Fund, which has been invested £200 million. And they're spending that money partly on directly commissioning interventions that help young people who are at risk of getting into gangs or getting into a life of violence. But it also does research into what works best. And they've got a very good evidence base of interventions that are really effective. And they've got a sort of top 3. But there are also some interventions which, on a common sense basis, you would look at and think, well, those will be effective. But it turns out the evidence base says actually are not effective. So we're trying to work with VRUs, violence reduction units, to make sure that the interventions, the work they fund, is more orientated to those effective interventions. I was also struck at yesterday's meeting by the impact that grassroots organisations can have, often run by people who have experienced themselves either as victims of knife crime or where one of their family members has tragically been killed or seriously injured. And I think working with those grassroots organisations can really have a very, very positive impact indeed. And that is something I would like to do more to encourage. A point I heard a member make, it may have been a member on the other side, was around identifying youngsters who are at risk of getting onto the wrong track at an individual level and intervening with them. And that is something I plan to do more on with local authorities. I'm aware of a case where a 12-year-old was involved in what you might call low-level criminality, but then went on to commit more serious offending later. That is the sort of example where we need to identify individuals and working with local authorities, children's services and others, mental health services as well, if necessary, to intervene to make sure those individuals don't become, an at-risk 12-year-old doesn't become a 17-year-old perpetrator. And associated with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is drug treatment. Too much violence is associated with drug, either acquisitive crime to fund a drug habit or violence associated with drug supply. We are investing £780 million over 3 years in increasing drug treatment capacity, and that has to be the right thing to do, especially for opioids, which are associated with the worst offending behaviour. And just finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the question of prevention, I completely endorse what was said. I think it was the member for Luton North again who said this. Bleed kits are vitally important, and I do want to work with local authorities and local police forces to make sure there are more bleed kits available, including tourniquets, which can, if there is a tragic incident, reduce the number of people who suffer either a very serious injury or a fatality. So those are all things, some of those things are underway already. Others are areas where we can do more. Now, that's prevention. Let me come secondly to the law. We've discussed this quite a lot this afternoon. Now, in relation to sentencing, and the member for, I think, Peterborough made some points rightly in this area, the current sentence for carrying a knife in public without good reason, and this, by the way, is any knife. It's any knife, regardless of whether it's banned or not banned, carrying any knife, even a kitchen knife, in public, in a public place, without good reason, is a criminal offence. And it carries a sentence of up to 4 years, and it's right that it does. And we have recently, through the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act, tightened the legislation to say that for a second possession offence, if you get caught a second time, then there is a strong presumption, in fact it'll apply in all but exceptional circumstances, there will be a 6-month minimum jail sentence. So those powers are in place. We're also legislating through the Criminal Justice Bill that's coming back to the House for its report stage in a few weeks' time, that where someone supplies a knife to an under 18, something that's very serious as we've discussed, there will be now a higher sentence, a 2-year sentence. We're also creating a new offence, which will be considered more serious, which is possessing a knife in a public place with intent to cause injury. Sometimes you get people who have advertised their intent on social media, and where they've done so, that should be treated more seriously. Now, yes, I will.
I'm grateful to the Minister giving way. Earlier on today, I asked his colleague, the Minister of State, a question, and I think he alluded to the fact that the current Minister at the dispatch box might answer. On the actual motion before the House today, the opposition motion, on the criminal liability for senior management of websites which indirectly sell illegal knives online, what is the, I don't want to corner the Minister, but what is the current sort of direction of travel on the thinking in relation to this particular criminal sanction?
Yeah, well, I thank my honourable friend for his very good question. I'll come on to that. So the sale of knives online is an area that we do want to tighten up, and the principal vehicle for that actually isn't so much the Criminal Justice Bill, although we are increasing the criminal sanction for supplying a knife to an under 18 up to 2 years in prison. It's actually the Online Safety Act, which got royal assent in October, and which will be getting commenced in stages as Ofcom draft their codes of practice. And the Online Safety Act puts a duty on social media firms, including, critically, online marketplaces, to proactively prevent priority criminal offences from happening. Now, I was, for a time, the Bill Minister for the Online Safety Bill, as it then was, and I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am correct in recalling the priority criminal offences are set out in Schedule 7 to that Act, but I am speaking from memory. So the Shadow Home Secretary wants to make a point of order and correct me. She's very welcome. I think it's in Schedule 7. And one of those priority offences, she's unusually quiet. One of those priority offences is concerned with the supply of knives. So the social media firms, including marketplaces, will have a duty to proactively take steps to prevent the sale of knives, including that are illegal, or the sale of knives in general to under 18s. And included, to answer the question about criminal liability, included in the Online Safety Act, as members do know, or at least should know, there are provisions that create personal criminal liability for executives of large social media firms in a number of circumstances. And in fact, during the passage of the Online Safety Bill, for precisely the reasons that the my honourable friend would mention, and probably the opposition had in mind when they drafted today's motion, those measures were strengthened as the Online Safety Bill passed through the House. So that is the mechanism, the Online Safety Act now, through which those points, including personal criminal liability, are being addressed. We are also acting, besides the measures in the Criminal Justice Bill, which, by the way, also include giving the police the power to seize lawfully held knives. These are things like, it could be kitchen knives, which are legal, but if the police reasonably suspect they're going to be used for criminal purposes, so somebody like a drug dealer might have like 10 of these knives that might technically be legal, but they've got them in their home address, then the police can seize those lawful knives where there is a suspicion they're going to be used for criminal purposes. That's in the Criminal Justice Bill. But we are also acting via a statutory instrument that's been referred to. It was laid a week or two ago to ban even more zombie style knives and machetes, and we set out in that statutory instrument the characteristics which those knives must have. Over 8 inches in length is one example. Certain features concerning the serration and the sharp edges. And the reason that won't take effect until September is we need to allow people who currently hold knives that are legal today but will become illegal the chance to surrender them, and that scheme will run over the summer, and the ban will take effect in September. And I'd like to particularly pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Southend West, who isn't in her place, but oh, she is. She's behind me. Who's been campaigning on this topic for some time and convened a knife crime summit last year with a number of police and crime commissioners, including Essex's excellent police and crime commissioner, Roger Hurst. And their campaigning, her campaigning and Roger Hurst's campaigning, led to this measure coming forward. So I hope, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's clear from those comments that the law has been tightened already. It's in the process of being tightened even further. Oh, and just in response to a question raised, a good question, raised by the honourable member for West Ham concerning children being coerced or manipulated into committing criminal offences. And she asked particularly about a private member's bill tabled by the honourable member for Mole Valley. This is something that we have studied carefully and taken advice on, as she would expect. And it is already an offence in relation actually both to children and to adults to encourage, control or cause them to undertake criminal activity. It's sections 44 to 46 of the Serious Crime Act 2007, which does what she is asking for, rightly. There are also provisions in the Modern Slavery Act 2015, speaking from memory at section 45, but I am again speaking from memory. It is in the Modern Slavery Act 2015. But those provisions in the Serious Crime Act 2007 are very wide-ranging, more wide-ranging, in fact, than the Modern Slavery Act. And it applies to children and to adults. And those are powers I would like to see police using a great deal more. Of course, I'll give way.
Can I say very gently to the honourable gentleman, and I am really genuinely very grateful to him for listening to what I had to ask and responding, that the experts in the field believe that those provisions in law do not do what it needs to. Would he be willing for me to write to him, have a discussion with him, so that we could perhaps take this forward?
Yes, I certainly would be very willing to work with the honourable member for West Ham and to look at sort of detailed representations. I've been advised that those sections are quite broad-ranging. I've read them myself, and on the face of it, as I read them, they do, just to read it as a Member of Parliament would read any bit of legislation, they do strike me as very wide-ranging in their scope. But of course, I would be very, very happy to listen to particular representations and to discuss them. And if those clauses, or sections rather, of the Serious Crime Act and the Modern Slavery Act are not have lacunae in them, I would absolutely be willing to discuss that, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the Honourable Lady on that topic and working with her on it if there are gaps that need to be filled. Let me come now, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the question of enforcement. We've talked about prevention, we've talked about the law needing to be strong enough, then of course we must come to enforcement, because we must protect our fellow citizens from criminal activity, knife crime in particular. Now, clearly it's important to make sure the police have the relevant resources. A member opposite referred to police numbers, and of course last year, March of last year, we achieved a head count of 149,566 police officers. That is more than we've ever had at any time. More than we've ever had at any time in history. In fact, about 3,500 more than there were under the last Labour government. And I would like those police officers to do a couple of things. I would like them to be patrolling in hotspots where crimes are a particular problem. Now, we've been doing hotspot patrolling in 20 force areas. It's called Project Grip, and that has delivered very significant reductions in violent crime. We also trialled hotspot patrolling in 10 force areas, including Essex and Staffordshire and Lancashire, around antisocial behaviour last year, and those delivered reductions in antisocial behaviour of up to 36%. So because we can see it working, from April of this year, just a couple of months' time, we are putting some new funding behind this, £66 million of funding over and above the record police settlement, which, by the way, sees £922 million extra going to police and crime commissioners. In addition to that, £66 million to fund hotspot patrolling in every single police force area in the country, targeted against antisocial behaviour and serious violence, because we know it works. And I'm sure members will be lobbying their police and crime commissioners to make sure those hotspot patrols take place in areas of concern to them. And I know, for example, one of the parts of Essex where those hotspot patrols have taken place has been Southend, and it has been very effective at reducing antisocial behaviour in Southend. So those hotspot patrols are a particularly important part of it. I do think stop and search is an important part of this equation as well. Now, some members, the Mayor of London, doesn't like stop and search, it would seem. Some members opposite don't either. I understand their concerns, but we do need to use stop and search confidently and proactively, done lawfully, done respectfully, of course, because stop and search does take knives off the streets. Stop and search has taken 60,000 knives off the streets in the last 4 years. Every month in London alone, 400 knives are taken off the streets by stop and search. We need to use it confidently and proactively and not pull back from using it, because it will save lives. And if you talk to the families of victims, who often sadly come from ethnic minority communities, the families of victims will say, if only my son's murderer had been stopped and searched on the way to the murder. That's the kind of thing you hear people say. And if you're concerned, if anyone's concerned about disproportionality, and it was a topic I wanted to look at myself, if you look at the rate at which knives or drugs are found on people who are stopped and searched by ethnicity, the successful find rate is about the same regardless of ethnicity. So that is to say, if someone is white or black or Asian or any ethnicity, the find rate is about the same. It's about, roughly speaking, 22 or 23%. And if there was disproportionality or unfair behaviour by the police, you would find a difference, but you don't. So I would urge all Chief Constables and PCCs to use stop and search confidently and proactively. A member mentioned, I think it was the member for Old Bexley and Sidcup, mentioned scanning technology. There is technology being developed, not ready for deployment yet, but being developed, and we're putting some funding into it this year, to scan people walking down a street, for example, to see if they've got, sort of semi-covertly, it's not a knife arch, it's a much smaller scanning device, to scan them and see if they've got a knife somewhere on their person. That is obviously much less intrusive than a stop and search. It doesn't lead to some of the tension that stop and search can lead to. It's obviously much quicker to do, And I'm hopeful if we can deploy that scanning technology, it will make it near impossible to carry a knife in a high-traffic place like a high street in London or something like that. So we are investing in that technology. There is also an opportunity to catch more perpetrators using facial recognition, including live facial recognition, which we discussed in the Bill Committee at some length. I'm not going to. The Shadow Minister's worried I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes describing it. I'm not going to. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to. But I will say that in the last week there has been a further deployment of live facial recognition in Croydon, and it has caught wanted people, wanted for serious offences, including knife offences. People have been caught in the last few weeks for wanted for rape, very serious offences, who would not otherwise have been caught. And so live facial recognition can help us here as well. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, a strong approach to enforcement is critical as well. I would just finish. We heard some political points opposite, and I've tried to deliver these concluding remarks in a spirit that is not too political. But a few people opposite did say they thought the solution to this would be a general election. Now, I would just politely and gently say that we do have the largest police force in the country, London, has a Labour Police and Crime Commissioner, and they have said the way that London is run is a model for a future Labour government. And I would just gently say that of the 43 police forces which I'm responsible for, overseeing, London, Sadiq Khan's stewardship of London, I'm afraid, is pretty much the worst. In the last year, knife crime in London has gone up. In the rest of the country, excluding London, it has gone down. They are the only police force to have missed their police uplift recruitment target, and in fact could have had an extra 1,062 police officers, for which there was government money available, but they didn't recruit them. And if that is a model for a future Labour government, frankly, heaven help us all. But in the meantime, where there are measures we need to take to go further, we will. Very open to having constructive discussions such as those I've agreed to have with the member for West Ham, because I know all of us are united in our desire to fight the scourge of knife crime. And for those of us who have attended the funerals of victims, as I did with Eliane Andam's family a few weeks ago, all of us, I think, are under an obligation, a moral obligation, as well as a public duty obligation, to do everything we can to leave no stone unturned in fighting that scourge. And I'll work with members on both sides of the House to make sure we do exactly that.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order papers, members that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. And so we proceed to the